this council committee of the whole work session meeting for Monday, November 10th. We have a full agenda. We have a hard stop at 9:30, right, Mary?
I would hope so.
Yeah, that's 3 hours from now. But we're starting tonight with the city vision, mission, and guiding principles. This is we'll get an introduction, and then after this, the next item on the agenda is our state legislative agenda, and then we're going to finish up with concurrency, another working session on concurrency. So a lot of good stuff. Emily, we'll start with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks. You all are familiar with this topic. In August, there was a request by council leadership for administration to draft a proposal for updating the city's vision statement and guiding principles. As you all know, the existing document dated back to 1990. So we set out on that work with these project goals in mind. Council identified a handful of goals for us. They asked staff to identify how we could prepare for the future, but also how we could ensure that we keep what's working now. You asked us to consider how to focus our organization on the same vision and the same guiding principles across the organization. And in addition, you wanted a work product that would help to develop a vision and guiding principles so that they could assist in setting priorities. So in August, City Council authorized the staff senior leadership team to go about that work, and we held a retreat that was facilitated. And at that retreat, we reviewed the existing vision and then we revised it with your goals in mind. We created a new mission statement and revised the guiding principles with a particular focus on raising the visibility of sustainability. Before I get into the work product from that retreat, I wanted to quickly review a few definitions that we used during the retreat so that we're all on the same page. Mission communicates who we are, what we do, and whom we serve. It's concise, and it includes a clear statement about benefit for a recipient, a customer, or in our case, often a resident or citizen. The senior leadership team also wanted to make sure that our vision was sufficiently lofty, and so you'll see that when I throw it up on the screen. And lastly, on the guiding principles, we found that many of the principles that had been developed in 1990 were still important and relevant, but we decided that we needed to do a little bit of wordsmithing, a little bit of regrouping or categorizing, and in some cases we made modifications or we added. So we determined that the guiding principles could be organized into 4 basic categories: people, place, prosperity, and service. And so this is what we propose. First, the vision. Issaquah is the best community to invest your future. This was meant to be big and bold, something that we think we're on the path toward, but clearly something that we could strive to attain. Mission. We created a new mission statement for the city, and it says, as a vibrant city, Issaquah engages the public to provide quality services that support a safe and sustainable community. And then the guiding principles organized around those 4 major headings. The first is people-oriented. Promote two-way communication between the city and community. Preserve our hometown feeling and community pride. Provide a wide variety of recreational and cultural opportunities. Encourage the development of successful neighborhoods. Share in the responsibility of meeting our community's basic human needs. The second is environmental stewardship. Preserve and enhance our natural areas, wildlife habitat, and open spaces. Encourage and inspire sustainable living. Promote responsible utilization of natural resources. integrate environmental protection and development, partner regionally to promote responsible resource management. The third was economic prosperity, pursue a balanced mix of land uses, including affordable housing, create and maintain a welcoming business climate, promote an effective continuum of education, encourage business diversity, provide a well-functioning multimodal transportation system. And then the last guiding principle we titled Service Excellence. Ensure a safe community. Consider financial implications in all decision-making. Influence regional decisions. Commit to a level of service responsive to the community's needs. Develop and retain high-quality employees devoted to serving the public. This is just a recap of our timeline. So in August, you authorized the retreat. We held that retreat. It was a very full day of wordsmithing and discussion. And then we drafted this proposal that's before you this evening. We presented it for first viewing on October 6th, and you referred it to this work session, and then we're hopeful to bring it back on November 17th for action. Possible adoption of the vision, mission, and the guiding principles. So at that point, I will answer any questions that you might have.
Does anybody have any questions? Emily, thank you. Could you go back to, it's your second or third slide?
Oops.
My mic is on.
It's 2 and 3. Do you want?
Go back one. Can you comment on the second bullet there, focus and align the organization?
Sure.
And I don't know, Bob, I might ask for your 2 cents on this as well, because when you read the previous vision and mission, I understand it. When that came together, really there was the city as an organization, as a capital C city, really it was in need of some clear alignment. They weren't all aligned, and so you have that up here again. But can you just comment for me how you see Bob as administrator and Amy in your, Emily in your role, how these goals could apply and may in any way have an impact on your organization?
Sure. Well, from my perspective, our departments have their own mission statements to help guide their work and make sure that they're focused on the aspect of service delivery that they're engaged in. What this architecture helps to do is to make sure that those mission statements are aligned with the broader citywide goals. So I think having a very clear mission in particular helps to reinforce who it is that we serve and why. But having a bigger vision also makes sure that we're asking our departments to reach a little bit further. It's a question that we can pose to them each time we are making a decision about service delivery or about where to spend time or where to spend money. Is this in service to the mission and the vision in particular? The guiding principles, in my short tenure here, I think are principles that are used on a daily basis for the most part already. You see it play out in the council goals. You see it play out in our department work plans. For me, this exercise just helped to make sure it was all on one single page, and that the time and effort we spent on wordsmithing helped clarify where we need to put the emphasis. So a single word choice about whether we are leading on delivering a particular guiding principle or whether we're assisting other partners was, for example, a very important conversation that we needed to have, because we could have had a department who felt like it was our role to lead and another department who felt like we were just to assist others. So it helped provide clarity for departments
So do you expect staff to like occasionally to review this and refresh themselves, and if they have any questions about their work plan or their own departmental goals and mission?
Absolutely. This will be a document that our department directors will discuss with their staff, and I can envision them making sure that their departmental missions are as aligned as they possibly can be if we have some tweaking to do there. And then as they develop their work plan for each year, to make sure that they're tying back directly to this.
So I actually have some more feedback, but I'd like to open it up for others. Josh?
Oh, thanks. So two things. One, it's a tiny bit ironic about engaging the public in the mission, but I don't recall what amount of public engagement there was on the development of this. Just an observation. In terms of the vision, I've been chewing over that statement again and again, and I'm really intrigued by it. It's a very, I think, Emily, you said it, it's a bold statement, I think was the word you used.
Lofty.
Lofty. And I know from this particular facilitator who did our ETP retreat, he definitely encourages the sort of lofty vision statement. I find the term invest to be a very interesting term. It speaks of partnership, it speaks of the community having some stake in the future of the community. What I'm not sure about, and I don't really have a suggestion, it's just another observation. So the current, and I don't even know if it's our vision, our slogan, what you would call a special place where people care. I guess it's a slogan. But that at least talks about the city and what the city is. It's a special place, there's people who care in the city, and so you know what Issaquah is all about. What this vision statement tells me is it's more sort of looking at someone else saying, hey, you, this is the best place to invest your future, but it doesn't really tell anybody what the city's actually about. So, if you're a farmer, I'm not sure Issaquah is the best community to invest that individual's future in. We don't seem to have a significant future in farming. Just an example, but I'm not sure that the vision tells anybody what we do. And I remember from this facilitator's talk that other, in the corporate sector, a lot of vision statements include things like company X will be the top seller of luxury brand vehicles. That was one of his examples, something like that. And that at least tells you what that company does and what they aspire to. So that's the only piece that I'm not 100% sure about on the vision. I like the statement and I like the use of the terminology. I just don't know if I'm somebody who's not in the city, what it is I'm going to be investing in. I'm being told it's the best, but I'm not sure what it is. So just a couple observations.
Okay, Nina, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I haven't heard, did you say what the structure, should I stick to the vision statement for now and maybe talk about that for a while, or go after anything? What do you like?
I think you should comment however you feel appropriate.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for your presentation, and thank you for all this work. And when I was looking through it, when you go through a process like this that's change, you do look back and say fondly, oh, I liked what it was. And there is some of that I tried not to be sentimental about, but I do, like Josh, want to compare and look at the usefulness of some of the things we used to have and compare it to what we have today. All in all, even though I'd like to propose a couple ideas for us to think about, all in all, there's a lot of good stuff here, so don't take it super critical. But the vision statement for me is especially where I'd like to spend time. There are two things, the vision statement and the order of the guiding principles. So those are the two things that I talked about most. And like Josh, the vision statement did not provide something distinct for me. In fact, I said that it doesn't say anything really specific. And when you're using these kinds of phrases to help in decision making, it should be attached to something that is unique. And this one, though it's lofty and positive, and I wouldn't disagree with it, I don't think it helps identify what Issaquah is. Who or what? How do I say that? I guess a what. So when I go back to the slogan, and let's ask right now, so what happens to the slogan? Does the slogan stay and partner up with these things, or is the slogan going away? That would be a question. It stays?
Yeah, I mean, we had, so you may remember that we've had vision, mission, and guiding principles, and this was an update of that, and we still had a slogan, so that wouldn't necessarily change.
Okay. I thought that the slogan was excellent and could be included in this because it not only does it state that we're different, and we like our being different, but the people who care is an incomplete sentence. People who care about what? Well, you know, you can fill in the blank. We care about other people. We care about people who are less fortunate than us. We care about the environment. It allows you to be very creative in the kinds of things that you care about.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that. Moving to the guiding principles and some notes I took there. The most important thing to me was that environmental stewardship went into the second group, and I'd like it on the top. You know, maybe I'm crazy, but when I moved here, one of the things that I really liked about Issaquah is that it cared more about the land and the stewardship that it took responsibility for than itself. It elevated that to a high principle. And if environmental stewardship were at the top of our goals, it might, if anybody agrees with me, might better reflect that. And then I just had a couple wordsmithing things, and for future consideration, can I just tell them to you on people-oriented?
Sure.
Where it says provide a wide variety of recreational and cultural opportunities. As our city grows, we may create more partnerships and outsource, and other people might be doing that. So I would, rather than saying provide, I'd say support or encourage. And then on the second one where we say encourage, I would say support, because these are the sort of things that we help other people do. And then under environmental stewardship, where it says preserve and enhance, I wanted us to consider putting the word restore. And those are my most important notes. That's it. Thank you.
Was there any other comments by Eileen?
Just to comment on the, I always do it the wrong direction. Talking in regards to the vision and some of the comments that I've heard, I actually really like this, and I like it because it's not really specific. So Issaquah is the best community, and the best community whether you're in business or you want to live here or you, any multiple of different bests of community. So it opens it up and is not sort of keeping it very specific and narrow. And you can invest in your future. So I like this, and I like the way it's written, and I like what it says, because it is very broad. It encompasses anything that you're coming to this city and wanting. It is the best community. As far as comments in regards to people-oriented and the environmental stewardship, the city, we can't be who we are without our people. And so for me, I think that is the first thing that has to be there, that we are people-oriented, that this is a community of those of us that are living here and making up this community. And environmental stewardship is very important, but without the people, environmental stewardship is not going to happen. So, my thoughts.
Thank you, Eileen. Anybody else? Stacy?
Thanks, Paul. I read this over the weekend, and I was extremely pleased with all the work that had gone into this. When we first started this exercise, I fully believed that we had all of the knowledge and experience in-house to figure out what this updated vision, mission, and guiding principles would look like. And I feel that I feel validated in believing that, because I just really think you all did a really good job. I don't see that the guiding principles, the 4 groups, are prioritized, so I'm fine in whichever way we would like to order them. And Josh, I can see that I clearly see the irony that you're talking about, but I was so extraordinarily pleased that we had elevated engaging the public up to the mission level, that I'm fine with that. I was really happy to see that that's where it had been elevated to, and I do. I took part in the process this summer with ETP, so I know the reason for having the broad vision. I really, really like it. I'm fine tweaking some of the words, but overall, I'm just extraordinarily happy with this.
Thank you.
Anybody else who hasn't already had a chance to speak? So I want to add some comments. For the most part, I really do agree with what Stacy just said. We could wordsmith. I've been in wordsmithing sessions. It's been wordsmith. I get that. And if I really think about the real use and the purpose of this, and I do some technical writing and provide versus support. I've been there, done that with some of that. I get that as well, and I don't feel. Now that you mentioned it, I don't. My first reaction is I don't know. I don't think they're necessary, but that's just my first reaction. My only comment, it's more of a question, is when I look at this, I tend to think about audience. That was my question to you earlier about what, as a reader and I'm a member of the staff, what does this affect? What effect does this have on me? But then I read it as a different potential audience member, a citizen. And in that case, my goal would be, you really want to help people find themselves in this document. And it can be very difficult to write for multiple audiences. I get that. And at the mission level, the only thing that jumped out at me is that the public is referred to in third person. So as a member of the public reading this, as a vibrant city, Issaquah engages the public. Oh, I guess that's me. As a general member of the public, to provide quality services that support a safe and sustainable community. And so that would be my only ask. I'm not, I don't have another way to suggest it to you right now. And I don't think we've really mapped out a plan on how to go forward from here, or if we're going to, I think the plan would be to formally adopt it next week and at our regular meeting. And there have been some other things, and we're getting some deliberation going here, but I don't know that it's really coalescing on any set of changes for you. But I just, mentioned one thing about somehow it not reference to the public in third person, somehow help them say that in another way, that it is, because in this, whenever I see the word city in capital C, obviously that means the organization that is issaquahwa.gov. And so if it's indeed the mission of capital C city, then that makes sense. But I was looking for something that was where citizens could find themselves in that statement a little bit better. So I'm not really suggesting a specific change, and if there isn't a consensus on any kind of change along those lines, I'm fine with it. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think your last point about who is the audience, who is the user of this document, how does Big C fit into that picture? I believe that the intent in drafting this was for all of your use and our department's use as the Big C.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Josh?
I do think that you could weave the slogan, as you were, into the vision, to basically say it's the best community to invest your future in a special place where people care. It's still pretty broad. If somebody were saying to me, hey, this is the best hedge fund you could invest, $20,000 in, I'd go, really, why? That would be the first question I would ask. And if somebody said to me, this is the best community to invest my future in, I would say, really, why? It just begs the question. So I don't have a problem with the vision statement as drafted. Again, I like the wording. I like the use of invest. I just sort of wonder what you're investing in if you're reading this from an outsider. And even if you just added investing your future in a special place where people care, to use the existing slogan, it adopts that historical point, which has already been a long-standing slogan of the city, but at least tells somebody something about the city beyond just, hey, you get to invest. Just a thought.
Any other comments? I'm looking at the original one from 1990. It's technically, we call it the motto, and it has so this was an update. Bob, you said that earlier. Did you guys actually talk about the motto? And it's not republished in this form of it. Obviously, you have a new vision statement. Was that?
So it was in the background materials when we proceeded with the conversation for that day. So we were aware and cognizant of it and what we were trying to accomplish for that day. And it was the directors, the mayor, and the consultant was aware of that too.
But it just wasn't addressed. The motto.
No, we pretty much stayed focused on these three areas.
Okay.
We had quite a bit of discussion about what a vision is versus a mission. For Stacy and Joshua, if you use the same consultant in another process, they probably went over that too.
And your communications department, using a motto, we've used that before, the existing model, Issaquah Special Place Where People Care. Had you got as far as, would this new material potentially change how that motto has been used so far? Perhaps not. Okay. So I'm just, okay. Mary Lou?
I asked the question of Bob, because obviously some of you guys have been in this kind of session before, so I'm throw something out there. I may say this wrong, but when I read the mission statement and the two descriptors of the community were just safe and sustainable, I was wondering if during your conversations you had added anything else into that, because I think of when we chose to move here 20 years ago, we came for other reasons. And one of them was because it was such an active outdoor area, really close to the mountains, all that. And I'm just wondering if you guys played with more words, or were you limited to trying to keep it more future-oriented and just pick a couple?
The mission statement took quite a bit of time to create, because we had to have first this discussion about what is an appropriate mission statement and how should it differ from the vision statement. And our conversation around sustainability and safety were that those were two very broad categories that could be applied to much of what we do, and that are basic requirements, requests, however you want to categorize it, from our residents, their expectations of our service. So we felt that those were the most encompassing descriptors. We have a laundry list of what we do, and our goal was to keep the mission statement concise. And in doing that, we had to find a way to summarize that list of services.
That's what I was wondering, if you had just tried to focus on a couple, because you could put a laundry list in there. It's just that I don't know if sustainable, to me, it covers a lot of things, but kind of in a conventional, not too exciting, descriptive way. So I'm just wondering if the audience was the public and you read this, does this mean, vibrant to me means that you have people and places to go to and things going on and you have things happening and all that. I get that piece of it, but the safe and sustainable seems to, we're recorded, I was going to say, it's not very sexy is what it came across to me. It's like, it's kind of not the two ones I would have landed on to describe where we were going. But I also don't have any other words to throw out there. I just feel, if this addresses us making transportation work and having more sidewalks, better bike trails, connected parks and all that, and that all falls under sustainable, I guess it's fine. It's not the most exciting language.
You know, these exercises are always difficult, and as Council President Winterstein mentioned at the beginning, you end up with a lot of stuff on the board, and then you narrow it down, and then you're left with what's left after everything else hit the cutting room floor. So I do think the staff felt good about where it ended up at the end of the day. You're right. I think they were looking at safe and sustainable in the broadest sense.
Definition.
Yeah, and definition of those words. So sustainable, like 3 legs of sustainability, and safe from a very broad perspective. So that's a challenging part of this exercise, and we could wordsmith, because we spent like 10 hours wordsmithing this whole thing on the date of the exercise too. But ultimately, we want the council to be supportive and feel good about what this comes out being. So this was our best efforts at the end of that day.
Paul, can I just have one follow-up
Sure.
comment then? This might be appropriate for its use. There's other things that we do where we can put in different kinds of language, and the people that we're marketing to, it's a different group of people. Maybe that's where some wordsmithing belongs in future exercises, tourism, marketing, that kind of stuff.
Thank you. That's, when we get back to, we think it's purpose and the primary audience, and even despite my comment about, the people finding themselves in it, if we think about that purpose, I would ask then that the council, we kind of consider that. And I know how about this as a way forward? I'm going to use a device we use, I'll call it the Costco device. If there's really a substantive change that somebody feels is necessary, and get it in by tomorrow. Write an email and send it in tomorrow, and I think then we'll huddle this week and decide and follow up, and whether or not we can continue on the current plan for Monday, or we have to have some type of other work session or not.
Sounds like a plan.
Is that, there's good comments here, but let's, sure, Eileen.
Just one quick thought. As I was looking back at one of the Roger Brooks presentations that I went to, and he was talking about the motto, a special place where people care. He said there's about 1,700 other communities in the United States that use that exact same wordage. So I'm not sure how special that is. So just thoughts.
You really, really care.
Yeah, special place where we really, really care.
Really care. Yeah, that's the difference.
Okay, we good?
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you, Emily. So next on our agenda is our 2015 state legislative agenda. And Bob, did you have a way to address that? I know that Doug
Yes.
Levy is here, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So Diane fell ill today, and so she bowed out of this evening's presentation. But she's been working closely with the mayor and the department directors and Doug on the development of the legislative agenda and update for that for 2015. And so Doug is here to walk us through that and provide comments and kind of an overview so that we can present this to you for your review and any amendments or adjustments, prioritization that you may have, and for final adoption.
Doug? Thanks for coming anyway, and appreciate you taking us through this.
Good evening to all of you. Thanks, council members, Bob, Emily, Councilmember Milligan. I look forward to working with you. Haven't had the chance to meet, so good to see you tonight. So to Bob's point, what I'd like to do is focus my comments primarily on the priority areas we're recommending to you for the 2015 agenda. If you'll indulge me, I'd like to back up a step because I think it's important for the council to have a bit of context in terms of the type of session we're entering into here. Obviously, we're only about a week out from an election that changed the complexion of the legislature quite a bit. I think we've now got a much more closely divided legislature. We were kind of humdrum here in the 5th and 41st districts, so we didn't have any cliffhangers to offer up, but we did have a lot of close races in other parts of the Sound and in the state. And in the state house, what was a 55-43 majority for the Democrats, which I think you'd call a very solid majority, is now a much more precarious majority. It's probably going to be a 4-seat swing. So we're going to see a 51-47 House. We already have a very closely divided Senate that, despite a lot of money and a lot of ads on TV and a lot of visibility for candidates on both sides, wound up after the election where it started, which was a 26-23 majority for what we call the Majority Coalition Caucus. The Majority Coalition Caucus might not need any Democrats to form its majority coalition in the coming year, but Senator Tim Sheldon, the one Democrat who had been part of that caucus, I think will be invited to continue to be in it. And remember that 2015 is a budget year, so whereas you all take one budget and you build your expectations on operating and capital and transportation, the legislature silos those into 3 two-year budgets. And then remember that we're also dealing with certainly the first state legislature I'm aware of in this state that's under a contempt order. So not only is the legislature and the governor just trying to figure out how to balance the budget with the usual challenges, but the state Supreme Court is fully expecting that another $4 to $5 billion in K through 12 investment will get added over the next couple of years, and really this biennial budget is going to be expected to go a long way toward that. So we have what used to be recessionary pressures on the state budget now replaced by K through 12 McCleary pressures on the state budget. We have both sides of the legislature where a couple of members can really swing the balance, so definitely a moderating influence, and I think maybe, if you're being half glass full, maybe the type of setting where the legislature will be more encouraged to draw each of their far right, far left factions toward the middle. We also have a governor who is only a year away from election, so I think that's going to factor in. As the governor seeks things like climate change solutions, I think, word is that he's not just going to be thinking of how he brings those to the legislature, but how he brings those to the citizens of the state of Washington. So we may see things tested in the legislature that don't pass, that are maybe being dress rehearsal prepared for the general public. And the one other thing I would say that's maybe a little closer to home for us, there's a renewed talk the last several weeks about transportation. If you saw page 1 of the Seattle Times a few weeks ago, the Times picked up on the congestion corridor report that the state DOT puts out, and just a lot of maps and a lot of figures about the increased delays we're all dealing with. And I was compelled the other day hearing that, a very short drive on I-90 between Issaquah and Bellevue, I think it was that particular day, was taking 40 to 50 minutes. And so it was just more of a graphic re-illustrating of what we all deal with on a daily basis. We also had the Washington Roundtable, a group of business leaders and CEOs, come out with a report from the Boston Consulting Group that talked about sort of the economic imperatives around transportation and the opportunities lost in terms of job creation, economic development, return on investment by not investing in some key corridors around the region and the state. So transportation, I would say, is certainly hovering out there with K through 12 education, with the budgets, and with the general, very closely divided politics. So that's a bit of an overhang of what we're dealing with the session to come. So in terms of the city's legislative agenda, just filling in the blanks on what Bob mentioned, we've worked with the mayor, the administration, and tried to go through and meet with various department heads, and then obviously keeping close tabs on Association of Washington Cities, Sound Cities Association, and some of the other conversations and spillover things happening between 2014 and now. And what we've put together for you has a lot of similarities to 2014, but I think some new elements. So what you have in front of you, at least for top priority purposes, is very focused on transportation, some distinct capital needs for you all, and then some of the near and dear revenue pieces where you either want to hold your ground or in some cases get things restored or get new tools in your column. So on transportation, we speak to a comprehensive package. We call out some specific I-90 corridor investments we think are key for the city. And then we get into the elements of a package that we think are real critical for Issaquah and others. Council President Winterstein.
Thank you. Doug, before we, you're getting into the specific material, which is great. Before we get there, I had a question.
Sure.
How do you and we use this agenda effectively?
For me, as your technician on the ground, it's really the priority areas that, to me, that's the direction I've been given on where to focus the most time on, basically things that are either specific to Issaquah or really critical to Issaquah. The next section of the agenda, what we call sort of the support and oppose, I think gives us some policy backing around a whole number of things we're pretty sure will come up where we want to either be joining the crowd in support of or joining the coalition in opposition to, but they're not things that are either specific to us or so near and dear that we consider them, a big use of energy and time.
So, okay, so I appreciate that. And so your focus and your time and your energy and the fact that would be, and this is really showing my ignorance about how things work in Olympia as much as anything. Hey, this is the Issaquah City Council. This is part of their agenda. This is a priority to them. How do you use that message? Is that delivery? Is it powerful? Does it have an effect? What I'm really trying to get. I want to listen. I'm looking forward to going. Hearing your overview of these. But I want to listen to it with a sense of really what type of impact you think, how it's said and what's said. How do you actually use that? And what impact does it have that it comes from this council?
Well, to me, it's sort of a ripple effect. I mean, you have 147 members of the Washington State Legislature, and a lot of them, don't know that much about Issaquah. But you also have 2 legislative districts that have portions of the city in them. And so to me, the priority items on your legislative agenda give you something to show to your local legislative delegation and say, these are the things that are a really big deal for us, that'll have a real impact on our community. Sort of going to the previous discussion, these are the things that may be lasting to our residents, to our businesses, and we find them important enough to say, they're go-home type items. So that's where I sort of see the starting point for your priority items. You're not going to be walking this around showing it to everybody, but it's the touchstone for your local legislative delegation, and they're most in position to hear from you, hopefully care about what you have to say, and take that into the hallways and the meeting rooms and the caucus rooms. So did you want me to sail into this stuff? I probably was guilty of diving into it before checking on any questions. So any other questions? So transportation is one that is, while we've updated some of the wording, it's going to be very familiar to you around the need for a package, and we've had the legislature sort of fumble the ball or punt on that one a couple sessions in a row. On the capital side, this is a 2-year capital budget cycle So some of the things that we kind of deferred in the middle of that 2-year cycle, we've brought back with a recommendation for you. One of them being the Confluence Park effort and continuing the work there on, having walked that park and been part of planning the ceremony from last month. That's kind of a game changer for you all in the midst of an urban area, and so we're hopeful of some additional capital dollars and assistance from the state to go with a lot of local commitment that you've showed. And then we have, we're going to wait to find out more about this, but we know that Washington State Parks has submitted some additional investments within Lake Sammamish State Park that they hope to see in the governor's capital budget proposal. We'll learn more about whether they're in or not next month. And then on the Issaquah hatchery, obviously we have a very strong advocacy group within the community in terms of Friends of Issaquah Salmon Hatchery. We've, did I get that right? Fish. Yes. And so we've had discussions with Fish and Wildlife. I think we had initially hoped to have some of the shortlist investments for the hatchery on the Fish and Wildlife list. Instead, they put some of the investments out into the future, I think more than we're comfortable with, and so we've done some follow-up work with our area legislators, and I think are hoping that some of the hatchery investments can be within the capital budget as an add-on to what Fish and Wildlife has put forward for other areas of the state. We've basically positioned that one and said we'd like to see these things at the hatchery, but legislative delegation, if it looks like it's getting in the way of Confluence is up here. So that's how we've at least recommended positioning those. And the fiscal ones, obviously you have a real fiscal stake in what happens with the legislature and whether they keep things like streamlined sales tax mitigation intact. We're making a forceful argument that they should, whether they keep the liquor tax revenue you have now and restore some of the cuts they've made in the past. And on this new industry we have under Initiative 502 with retail and producing and processing of marijuana for consumption, is the state going to set up a distribution system where it's sending money to the cities and the counties that it expects to do the work of law enforcement and zoning and licensing and the like. And then finally, if the legislature is going to be holding everything within its budget and not trying to restore and not trying to help local government, can they at least give you some new tools in your toolbox so that you have additional revenue options to consider yourselves? So that's the mix of things we put in fiscal. So we've really tried to focus on a few key areas. There are clearly a number of other things that are going to come up, and we've got several of them spelled out in the remaining, say, 4 pages of the agenda in what I would call that second tier. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the first ones, as well as the support oppose. I would just finish by saying, remember that this is your agenda, and ultimately, as we take it to you for finalizing, we want you to be comfortable that it reflects the priorities you have.
So in the fiscal issues area, so if I understand this correctly, I like the way you summarize this. So they've made some changes. They're holding on to revenue. And in the case of liquor and the recreational marijuana, well, the recreational marijuana in particular, well, we've never had it before, right? So there's never been a stream from it would strike me that that our legislature in Olympia would somehow change the distribution of the monies from recreational marijuana and start giving things to the city.
What makes us think that's possible?
It seems like that's just, with McCleary, like you said earlier, I mean, you said it's not recessionary pressures, it's kind of McCleary education pressures they've got revenue now, this idea that, you know what, we'll take less of that and give it to cities. It just seems counterintuitive that any chance of that. And so you may want to comment on that.
Yep.
But my real reaction is the third point. That, yeah, other tools. Okay, well, if you're not going to loosen your grip on anything, give us more tools. Is that correct summary?
Great question, great point. So on the marijuana, I think the one thing that may distinguish that one from things like liquor taxes, the state has not booked the money from 502 marijuana yet, meaning, you know, on their balance sheet, they don't have it on any columns. So they're expecting $60 million in new revenue this coming biennium. And unlike liquor or unlike a whole number of other categories, they haven't placed it anywhere in the budget. It's sort of in the still to come category. So that may be one area where cities and counties have more of a chance to say, hey, you're just starting this, you haven't booked it yet. Don't you think it makes sense to share the revenue like you did 70 years ago coming out of Prohibition with liquor? Some of the same principles seem to apply. On your other point, yeah, I think there's more volume than I've ever seen in the last several years on, okay, if you're in such straits at the state level where you think you can't look to any of the traditional silos and give us assistance, then at least give us some authority, and we can consider it at a council level or take it to our voters or some combination thereof. Obviously, you all, with the current budget that you're working on with things like the B&O rate, you're making some local authority decisions to try and get at how you take care of all the service needs, infrastructure needs in your own budget. So one example at the state level that I think is being talked about more and more, back in 2001, there was an initiative that limited the annual growth in property taxes to 1%. It had been up at 6%. So that was a big sea change. And there's more noise now about, gosh, is 1% really keeping pace with inflationary costs? Now, some jurisdictions, including this one, have chosen not to take the 1% in certain years. But the point that I think cities and counties are making with legislators is, look, what if we were given some choices here, and we could make those choices at a local level to reflect our own communities, rather than putting some limits in place that on the revenue side don't seem to keep pace with the cost inflation. So some of those things, and transportation funding options is another one. Those things are being given greater weight, I think, as we head into 2015.
Other questions? Lena?
Thank you. Love this stuff. Thank you, Paul. You asked several of the things that I was going to ask. So that's great. And I want to focus also on the fiscal questions. And just the way that I was mulling it over, and maybe you can help me in how I'm evaluating this, is that when I look at the streamlined sales tax mitigation, I feel that's very tenuous, and that would be an easy thing for somebody to say that this is just insupportable. We can't be distributing sales tax and pay out a mitigation fee forever. And so when they're looking for something to get rid of in that kind of expense category, I think that would be easy pickings. And so I wonder, do you keep that in the strategy so that they have something to say, well, can't do that for you, but I'll do this for you? Mm-hmm. And the things that I thought would be more likely to push hard on are the things that Paul brought up. The liquor tax distribution has history in the state, and I think that there's a strong expectation in the formation of the marijuana marketplace that those taxes were to be local. So I think that has a real strong political motivation. So how do you balance those strategies when one of them you might know doesn't have as good a chance?
Yeah. So on the streamlined sales tax, maybe a bit of quick history, because there's maybe some stronger motivations for the legislature than you might think on the surface. The state had been what we call a point of origin state in the way it credited local sales tax for years and years, and about half the states in the union were. And you know, when the idea of a national compact, the streamlined sales tax came about, you know, one of the things that states banded together and said, you know, in an internet age, if we're ever going to have Congress agree to impose a sales tax on internet commerce, you know, that's a click and buy. It makes sense to have the sales tax defined in a way where it goes to final destination. So the state, you know, finally got there and agreed to that in 2007, but with an understanding, they'd done studies before, and with an understanding that it was going to cause a huge amount of dislocation in revenues. And for a lot of cities, some counties, some transit agencies that had been simply following the rules the state laid out. So I think there was a lot of sympathy in the legislature that as they changed this system over and really caused revenue dislocation for, you know, what the study showed would be over 100 jurisdictions, that it made sense to have a full mitigation plan. I think where we may have a bit of a tipping point is if and when Congress passes what's now being called the Marketplace Fairness Act and starts to apply sales tax on internet transactions uniformly, that's going to be a lot of new revenue for the state of Washington. It'll be a lot of new revenue for probably most counties and a lot of cities. At that point, the mitigation program, I think, is going to be under a lot more pressure. In advance of that, I think there is I think there's a fairly good cross-section of legislators who believe it's important to keep the mitigation intact. And part of it is you have some legislators in very high-up leadership positions who have jurisdictions who are, you know, very strongly impacted. So Pat Sullivan, for example, is the House Majority Leader. He represents Kent and Auburn, highly impacted jurisdictions. Joe Fain is the Senate Floor Leader. He has that same district. Senator Andy Hill is the Senate Ways and Means Chair. He has Woodinville in his district, very impacted. So I think on the streamlined sales tax mitigation and where we've been working as part of a coalition, I think there's a decent chance the legislature again extends what they have been doing. I wouldn't say they're going to add to that program by any means. And I think to your other point on marijuana, we do feel we have a strong case. I think cities and counties have banded together to also show the legislature that, you know, we have a U.S. Department of Justice that's put 2 states on notice and said, if we're going to be keeping our nose out of your business, there's several specific things we want you to do. We want you to keep marijuana out of the hands of minors. We want you to curb illegal trafficking. And if you look at the Department of Justice memorandum to the 2 states, a lot of those expectations involve the state turning to local law enforcement saying, help us with this. And so I think we do have a lot of support from legislators who say it only makes sense then to distribute some percentage down to the local level. They get nervous about jurisdictions that are banning, and I think that causes some complications, but I do think there's a lot of support. And the toolbox thing, I think there's some support, a lot of different dynamics depending on which option. Councilmember Martz.
Thank you. My question is, in answer to that question about keeping those revenues available, right now 1351 appears comfortably to have passed. What will that do to the calculus that you just discussed?
Very good question. So yeah, my look this morning, and I haven't looked to see from the batch today if there was one, but Initiative 1351 had an 18,000 plus vote lead. And I have people looking at laptops, so I may be getting you an outdated number.
It's actually up to 27 now.
27.
It's over a full percentage point now.
So it is looking like Initiative 1351 is going to pass, and if you think about the remaining votes, they're primarily from the more urbanized counties of the state. So I think we start assuming that 1351 does pass. What that initiative will do is add even more funding pressure to the K through 12 McCleary pressure I talked about, because there is no funding source for Initiative 1351. And the fiscal estimates are, up to $4.7 billion in new costs over a 4-year period to essentially take the K through 3 class size components of McCleary and extend those out to grades 4 through 12 and extend them out to some support staff expectations, and by nature probably bring in some capital requirements. So Initiative 1351, if the legislature decides it wants to try and fund it, would add a lot of pressure to the operating budget and would probably add a lot of pressure to the capital budget. The big question is whether the legislature, given what's likely to be something like a 51-49 result, would be emboldened to say, we get it that there was a close vote. For some of us, it was a no vote in our counties. And for a lot of us, it wasn't anything that was funded. So like some prior initiatives, we'll defer it. We may have that kind of a dynamic in a closely divided legislature. But that's a huge question. If the state decides, if the legislature decides, no, we have to figure out ways to fund Initiative 1351, I think even some of the remaining state shared revenues we've scratched and clawed to hang on to are under new risk. And, to Councilmember Milligan's question, now things like streamlined sales tax do start to get more tenuous. So, that's one of the, $64,000 questions is, does the legislature feel sufficiently motivated by a close yes vote to say, yeah, we've got to figure this out on top of McCleary? Or does the legislature say, close vote, we're going to try and get to some of our underlying McCleary obligations first? That'll tell us a lot, and I think we'll see those kinds of debates play out probably from January through April. I should have mentioned to you it's a long 105-day session of the legislature with a lot of speculation that day 105 will come and go and they won't have their budgets finished. So.
Any other comments or questions for Doug? Doug, was there anything else that you wanted to touch upon before we wrap this up?
No, I think we would hope to then arrange a date to bring this back to you all for finalizing. If, as you all go home from this meeting or in the coming days, look through and see something that's really, got steam coming out of your ears, by all means, let us know. Again, I mean this sincerely. I think we don't want to go down to Olympia with something you all have misgivings about. We think we've, caught a lot of the sweet spots on what the priority areas have been, but we want to hear from you if you have concerns.
I appreciate that. And Bob, just to review again, it was, you said Diane, Doug, yourself. Who conferred to put this together?
So Diane took the lead on the leadership team, but Doug and Diane worked with all the department directors in putting it together. So it's really a jointly developed document.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Doug. Thanks for coming by. Thanks for this information. It'll be a fun time for us all.
Yeah, thanks all, and great questions. And one thing I would mention is we hope to set up a breakfast meeting with our legislative delegation so that you all get that direct audience before session starts.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
So we're on to our third item in the agenda, and our principals are out in the hallway having a little confab. Do we need any type of break before we get going? Is anybody requesting it this time? Okay. So next on the agenda, here they come. Concurrency is up. can get set up. Made a noise, that's promising. I haven't done this much, so
Okay.
what do you think here?
Scan and fix, continue without scanning. Yeah, what are we fixing?
Huh? There it is. Okay. Got it.
Oh, perfect.
And then escape, and you go down there. How's that?
That's the one.
All right.
Good. We're ready.
Ready, set, go. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome, Charlie, Dave, and Randy. You got the lead, Randy?
I'm going to go ahead and kick it off, and
Okay.
then it'll be Randy's show for the most part. So we're back again, and just to bring you up to date one more time, we are here to talk about parks impact fees and our updated parks impact fees, which have not been updated since 2008. Within that discussion, there are two components. One is the residential fee, which we've had for a long period of time, and then there's a non-residential fee, which is new. We also have the transportation impact fee update, which we've not updated since 2006. And within that, we have the traffic impact fee, which we've had for a longer period of time. That is what we're updating. And we also have a multimodal impact fee, which is a new proposal. And then we have simplified concurrency, which is really changing the way that we look at concurrency policy as it relates to transportation. And that is a part of this discussion. This is, of course, a part of a series that we started back in June, and we've mapped out the timeline. We've adjusted it a little bit as we've gone. We'll share with you kind of where we are in that process this evening, but we're looking at it going through the end of the year at a minimum. And everything you've heard so far has really been leading us up to this point. So what you'll hear from Randy is a lot of information you've heard before, but it will kind of build up to a discussion of the impact fees, which is the recommended impact fees, which is really the outcome of the discussions that we've been leading through here. And I do want to recognize Dave briefly just for really good project management on this. He's been working on this now for over a year, trying to herd cats and departments and council committee meetings and the Planning Policy Commission, working closely with them, and it's a whole variety of folks. So thank you, Dave. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Randy, who's done lots of work in the last 4 to 6 weeks. This has been Randy's crunch time, and I think he can sleep. Hopefully he can sleep soon. Hopefully he'll get a weekend back, too. But tonight he's here, and he'll talk about fees and other things.
Great. Thank you, Charlie. By the time we're done this evening, we're going to finally at last see what the numbers are all about. You may remember in September, a year ago September, when I first had a work session with you, and we were guessing that the cost per trip might be somewhere in the vicinity of $19,000 per trip. You get to find out what the real number is tonight, and it is considerably lower than that. We'll just say that until you get to see the slide. We have been spending a lot of time working on the technical end of how to put together simplified concurrency. And it has led us to learn an awful lot about the transportation network, and it has taken quite a bit of time to get the calculations right, and they are right now, and you're going to see them tonight for the first time. The reason you haven't gotten a big report from us in advance to read is because we're actually still finishing the report. Tonight you get the numbers, and within 3 or 4 days you'll get the reports. And that's going to be okay, because if we'd given you the reports first, the reports are just a piece of the whole picture, and what you're going to see tonight is the whole picture. It reminds me of if I had been, when I was wanting to learn how to drive as a kid, if my dad had handed me the owner's manual to the car and said, read this, you would learn how to drive, that's what would happen if we'd given you the rate studies tonight without the rest of the picture. So I hope that you will appreciate that we're trying to give you the big picture of how to drive concurrency, and that you will get all the reports in the next few days, and then we will have multiple meetings together to go through it. So there's no rush to have to adopt it without understanding it. We're just rolling it out in a particular way. So today's topics are a little bit of a reminder about growth, and then we're going to talk about the park impact fee, and get through that fairly briefly, because we're going to spend most of our evening talking about transportation-related issues, both simplified concurrency and then the mitigation fees, the two fees that go with that. And we're going to talk about what those fees look like in comparison to some other cities in the area. And we'll wind up with some policy choices. We have specific recommendations, but we have some alternatives to share for you to be thinking about. And then we'll end up briefly with our schedule. So in many of the slides, as Charlie said, you've seen a lot of this information before. If you look just below the title in the upper left where that little print is from the July 14th work session, keep your eye on that part of the screen, because you're going to see reminders like that on a lot of these slides that this is stuff you've seen before. It isn't meant for you to go, I don't need to see it again, but it's to put all the pieces of the puzzle together. And we're doing concurrency because it only applies to new development, and we collect fees only from new development. So we need to know, is there going to be any new development? And this is the slide that tells us yes. This compares, the blue bars are the city data and the red bars are the traffic model data, and they're there not to show that there is a difference, but to show that the differences are so small they're statistically insignificant. What counts is the difference between the 2013 pair of bars and the 2030 pair of bars. That's where the growth is coming in. To put it in simple numbers, it means that between now and the year 2030, we're expecting another 10,640 dwelling units and all the people that come with that, which sounds like a lot, but on an annualized growth rate, it's about 2.9% a year. That's a very manageable level of growth. And for the business community, we're looking at over 7 million square feet of additional business space. Also, again, it sounds like a lot of space, but it's about 3.5% a year, which is a good, successful economic development-driven approach. But it's completely consistent with, it is based on the growth in commitments that you've already made as a city. As you went through the Central Issaquah Plan, as you thought about becoming a regional center, you've agreed to these numbers. This is not us telling you you have to do this and we're building a plan for it. Rather, we're understanding what you've already agreed to, and we're building concurrency and transportation impact fees so that it will afford this for you. So that's growth. Now we're going to take a look at park impact fees. And we're going to talk about, first of all, why and how it is that we're going to be applying this for the first time to businesses. And what this slide reminds us is that the current impact fee, the one that was done in 2008, charges houses but not businesses. Okay? And probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the cities in Washington that have park impact fees do what you do and are doing right now, don't charge businesses. What we're recommending is in the update that we've added off to the right there, that residents will continue to pay a fee, and for the first time, businesses would pay a fee. And there's some things up there to help you understand why we're making this recommendation. We're still using the notion that the test of benefit for parks is not actual usage. It's not like trip generation rates for cars where we go out there and count how many cars are on the roads. For your park system, right now in your current impact fee, you charge it based on the availability of the parks, that you could use it, not that you do use it. And what we're saying is, you know, businesses could use it too. Their employees could take lunch breaks, their visitors could come and take a walk through the park for health reasons or whatever. And we have now nearly 1/3 of Washington cities that have taken this step, and we think it's time for Issaquah to consider taking this step. We think it's completely defensible. We'll talk a little bit about the methodology, and then you'll get a big thick report that talks about that methodology in detail.
Randy?
Yes?
Just for clarity, and this is all just growth-based still?
Correct. Impact fees are only paid if you're developing something new. If you're here and not moving out of your house or your apartment, not starting a new business, none of what we're talking about tonight has any interest for you at all. You know, turn on the Sounders game, see if they're going to win. But what we're talking about here is development related.
I was going to talk about the Sounders, but I won't. No. A question about that. So it's only for new growth. So if we have existing buildings and we have a change of use where somebody who runs, I don't know, something that doesn't generate a lot of traffic, it's the same square footage, but they now want to redevelop, this applies to them?
So we're going to talk near the end of my presentation about what your current policy is.
Okay.
and we're going to talk about recommending a change to that policy.
Okay.
Okay? The current policy is you do charge for it, and we're going to recommend that you stop. Okay? So here's some numbers from the current park impact fee that you're charging right now. It's based on the work that we did in 2008, and we identified about $1.9 million worth of park projects that needed to be built, of which 1.1 million were eligible for impact fees. The others were not for a variety of reasons. Maybe they were replacing an old ball field instead of building a new one. And we had, look at that little tiny growth number, all of 451 people. This was back when you weren't a regional center, you weren't doing the Central Issaquah plan. We were working off of really old regional numbers, okay? I know, I was stunned, but we verified it at the time. That was the number for that 5-year period. And so you divide $1.1 million by 451 people, and your impact fee is $2,439 per person. And at the bottom, the way that shakes out between growth share and the city share is about 50-50, 1.1 million for the growth and 800,000 for the city, okay? That's what you got right now. Here's what we're recommending. $46 million worth of projects, of which 24 million would be for growth. Why are we increasing that so much? Look at the growth numbers. Instead of 450 people, we're going to have 12,000 people. And again, these are the growth numbers we've already agreed to. So this isn't stretching beyond anything that you have already approved. Well, if 12,000 people need $2,500 worth of parks apiece, you need $46 million worth of parks. In fact, what I find really interesting is the cost per person is actually going down slightly from $2,400 to $2,000. So the park impact fee with this new scenario will be less than the current park impact fee.
Did you do did you do a calculation without the charging for businesses to see?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And we don't have that as part of the slides, but we do have it as part of the policy options paper at the very, very end, okay? Because that is still an option. You can say, Greg, give me the new stuff, but don't charge businesses. And we figured you'd want to know what that looked like either way, okay? And by the way, the number for houses is still less even if you don't charge businesses. If we do charge businesses, it's a zero-sum game. There's so much parks we're going to buy, and if businesses are going to buy 10% of it, then the houses have a 10% reduction. So that's our park impact fee recommended. And so what does it look like in terms of rates? The top line is what you're charging now. On the left is the single-family houses. In the middle is multifamily, which you'll be getting mostly, particularly in Central Issaquah. And then way over on the right, what you would charge business, and we don't charge business at all. And then we have 2 rows for the proposed 2014 rates. One would be residential only, so you have a 0 over there under businesses, so that answers your question about the difference. And then the bottom row is if businesses do pay an average of $2.20 a square foot for every kind of development. We actually have we have 2 different versions of that, one in which there's different kinds of businesses. But if businesses pay $2.20, then the residential costs come down even further. If we don't charge businesses, then the residential numbers are going to go back up to that middle row. Okay? Everybody, I think we're going, go ahead.
The multifamily is per residential unit,
Right, per apartment, per condo. Mm-hmm.
and so it's assuming that the multifamilies have quite a lot lower occupation, and that the single-family homes have 3+ people living in them.
Yes. Okay? So, we know that there's a city share and there's a growth share. And so the question is how are we going to pay for all of this? And the new impact fee rates will pay a share. We have actually the bond issue you've already issued, but it hasn't been fully spent, and so that's going to contribute to part of these costs. That'll pay for a piece of it. You have had a long and regular policy of using real estate excise tax money, getting grants, sale of land, sale of some property. All of those, we've looked at the historical numbers on that, continuing that regular policy. And then you have a small cash balance in your current mitigation fee account, and you put those all together, and it pays for these bills. And so this one's good to go. Okay, it's just the policy issue. Do you want to charge businesses or not? And are you comfortable with the new numbers, even though they're a little bit less than they are now? Now we're going to turn to mitigation, to concurrency, and to the transportation fees. And this is going to be the longer part of the presentation. We're going to start with some reminder slides. So remember that little warning up there? This one was from over a year ago when I first talked to you about what were your concerns? Why were you even asking the staff and consultants to think about concurrency? And it's because it was complicated, it was unpredictable, and it was inconsistent. These were things that weren't making you happy, it wasn't making the development community happy, it wasn't making the staff happy. There pretty much wasn't anybody rooting for this. And you wanted to take a new look at it. And you wanted to understand more clearly, on the one hand, we do this concurrency thing that's part of review, and on the other hand, we got our cash registers set up, and, you know, what's the connection? Is there a connection? And what we said to you is, they're both important things, but the review is just about issuing the permit. The funding, the mitigation, is about paying for the impacts that you create. And you could do them unrelated to each other, and you had been, but what we suggested is if we bring them together so that what is paid for in the fees pays for what you need for concurrency, then you can simplify concurrency. Instead of having all these elaborate traffic studies, it would be come in, tell us how many trips you got, and you're out of here. You don't got to write us a check. So with that concept in mind, we reminded you of the history that you've been through. This was from last July 14th slideshow. I think this was one of Torsten's slides. And I'm not going to read all this stuff to you. It's just meant to remind us that we've been at this for a long time. And on the top, there have been multiple updates. And on the bottom, multiple different other studies that have been done. In the more recent past, last year in calendar 2013, you really drilled down deep into this and had multiple presentations. In April of 2013, Torsten gave you a presentation about concurrency. Then Dave and Bob talked to you in May. Dan came in and talked to you in July, and then I spoke to you in September. By then, we had really put together this concept of simplified concurrency. And you started going, this could be interesting. This is worth authorizing you to look at. Go staff, go consultants, put it together and bring it back to us. And we said, okay. But in doing that, we need to have lots of meetings with you because it's going to be complicated stuff and some of it's going to be boring but very important from a policy viewpoint. So we set up a series of meetings with you. But what we wanted to do was to address the concerns that were still on the table, that the changes you had made up to that point weren't enough. It was still too complicated. We still needed to simplify it. And so we developed these principles, and we shared these with you last September. Protect the level of service. Okay, we're not just going to go to level of service F on all the streets. That would be a way to do it, but that would be a bad way to do it. Improve the transportation system. We've been talking about it for a long time, but we haven't had a really good track record of actually building a lot of streets and intersections and roads. So we needed to put that as a higher priority. Put fewer steps in the process so it's easier to follow. Make it less complicated. Make it more predictable. Those became our guiding principles. And so that led us to develop the simplified approach. And the simplified approach has three parts, and this is a slide you saw a year ago. The first part is there's going to be a concurrency capacity review. No more hiring a special traffic consultant to do a special study and then send it to Torsten to do a special computer run. We don't need any of that if we can make all the pieces of the puzzle work. And my job tonight is to show you how we did that and why we think it works. In addition to this simplified concurrency capacity review, we recognize that for large-scale developments, we still need a technical study for local access and safety so that they don't put the driveway in the wrong point and blow up an intersection that we thought we'd fixed enough and now it isn't enough. So we reserve the right to take larger developments, basically 30 or more PM peak hour trips, and have them do a traffic study, but not a traffic study with all the impacts, just a traffic study on what they do to safety and what they do to local operations. And then link it all to the payment so that it isn't unconnected, but rather you do pay, and what you're paying for is buying what you need in order for us to let you go through with the simplified system. You're going to see a little bit more about how that works next. So let's take that concurrency capacity review. This is the first of the three steps for simplified concurrency. We're going to ask two questions. How many trips does a proposed development generate? And how many trips do we as Issaquah have in our trip bank? And we're going to compare the two. And we're going to make the how many trips do you have a simple calculation, and we're going to make the how many trips do we have in the trip bank a simple calculation. And so now we're going to talk about how those pieces come together. First, how many trips does the development have? And if you're reading carefully, you're seeing a bunch of adjectives in there. How many internal trip ends? And I'm using the shorthand of trips. in the next few slides, we're going to expose you to a level of detail you hadn't seen before about internal and external and trip ends and trips and why we have to use this particular approach, which is where I'm going next. So can you get me to the other slideshow? Yeah.
I think we press the escape and head on over to the other one. It is sitting right there.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
I don't like messing with somebody else's keyboard and computer. I'm afraid I'll blow up the whole thing. So Torsten was going to be with us this evening to make this part of the presentation. It's really out of his technical work, but he and I have worked together for a long time, and I'm very comfortable with what I'm going to share with you, and he has some family health issues that he had to stay and attend to. So I'm going to talk to you, that's why it's got his name on the slideshow. We're going to talk a little bit about the traffic model and trips. And we're going to remind ourselves of the work that he's gone through before, but you're going to see some all new slides tonight as we talk about defining trips in very specific ways. So as you hear us use this word trip, we really mean trip ends, okay? Where did it start and where did it finish? Because each end of the trip has a separate potential location. And it could look like this. If you were in the upper left going from an existing development to another existing development, that's two ends of a trip that's between existing and existing. But drop down one row, if you leave an existing development and go outside of existing, you would go to new vested development, that's the red box. We're now connecting you to something that isn't there now, it's going to be there in the future. And you can see all the different combinations of existing to vested, existing to new, vested to new. We need to know the ends of each trip because some of the trip ends we can put in our trip bank. And some of the trip ends we cannot. Some of the trip ends we can charge money for. Some of the trip ends we cannot. Let me be specific. Way over on the left under the purple, existing to existing, that's an existing trip. They're not coming in for a permit. We're not going to get any money for them. So all of our calculations about impact fees have to exclude, those trips. I think I'm about to cause an electrical flare here. I don't think I've messed up the keyboard. Thanks. So we can't charge money for the internal, for the existing trips. And what we can charge for and what we can issue concurrency on are the vested, which are new, and the unvested, which are new. So if they don't exist now, the 29,601 trips that are in that subset of the total of trips are trips that we can, in fact, include in our concurrency system and on our impact fee system. But they're not identical. Concurrency gets one part of the trips, and impact fees gets an overlapping different set of the trips. And so here's what that looks like. I think I'm okay, thanks. So now we're going to talk about internal and external trips. I means internal, E means external. I means it's inside Issaquah, E means it's outside Issaquah. And you can see that there are four different combinations. At the upper left, from I to I means from somebody left inside Issaquah and they wound up inside Issaquah, okay? From I to E means they started here, but they went outside the city. E to I means they started in Sammamish or Renton or someplace and wound up here. And E to E, that's I-90. Technically, it's other forms of through traffic, but it's basically the I-90 through traffic. They're here, but they're, you know, they wave as they go by and we wave as they go by. They're not affecting our local streets, okay? So keep in mind this combination, because when we go back to that 29,600 trips, the ones that are not existing trips, they're new trips, there's 5,400 of them that have the purple E ends that we cannot count, okay? And the white E ends are not even part of the 29,600. They're totally external to external. That's the ones on I-90. We can't capture their impact fees. We don't issue development permits for them. They're outside of our purview. They're just flying through, clogging up I-90. Their traffic may back up our ramps, and so we have local effects, but we can't refuse to permit them under concurrency, and we can't make them pay us. So they're out of our universe, even though they affect our universe, okay? So we're going to have 24,180 vehicle trips that we could use as the beginning point for part of our system. Excuse me, and that's the part of the system that's for impact fees, who has to pay us, okay? And the reason we're making a difference between that and concurrency is concurrency takes the 24,180 trips that are internal, the bottom of this slide, and uses it to begin this next slide and says, oh, we got 24,180 trips that we can regulate for concurrency, but we already regulated 15,000 of them. They've already been through your approval process, and they're vested, okay? So these are a few small ones and a bunch of big ones. This is remaining trips that have not been built yet. The development has not happened. It includes Costco, okay? But it includes parts of Tallis, Highlands, Rowley property, Pickering, okay? Anything that you've approved and hasn't been built yet is part of that. So you've actually, out of 24,000 trips that you could have, you've already approved 15,000. Just in case you're thinking, oh my gosh, I've only got 8,400 trips left, let me put that in perspective. That's 5 more Costco's. It's a bunch of trips. So there's all kinds of capacity for you to achieve what you want to achieve in Central Issaquah with the mixed use, with the residential, with the walkable restaurants and theaters and the things you want to accomplish. We've got the trips for them. But we just need to understand that we've already approved a bunch of other trips. That's what this slide is about. Now, one more thing to understand about these trip ends. This has so far been about concurrency. Now we're going to look at impact fees. And yeah, I know you haven't seen any of these numbers before. It's because we're going to make a transition from trips in vehicles, which we were looking at a minute ago, and now we're going to talk about person trips, which is the number of people in cars, the number of people walking and bicycling, because we need to use person trips as our common denominator for impact fees for bike and ped, as well as impact fees for cars. And I'm going to get back to another slideshow that shows you how to do that. For the purpose of understanding how we do the impact fee calculation, there are 40,000 trip ends in vehicles and another 10,000 trip ends, 10,600 in bike and ped. And so those combined are going to give us 50,000 trips. Those are the same 50,000 trips that were coming out of the 25,000 vehicle trips. It isn't as simple as just double that and get to this number. I'm going to show you a little bit more about the math. And if you really want to get into it, I've got a rate study for you. And if you really want to get into it deeper, I've got an appendix in the rate study, and you'll be able to do this on your own at home. Okay? So no more kids, don't try this at home. Yes?
Clarification, by non-motorized, do you truly mean just non-motorized, or do you mean that other definition, which is non-single occupancy motorized?
No, we mean non-motorized.
Just non-motorized.
Right.
Okay.
We are not able to distinguish between high occupancy vehicle and single occupancy vehicle in the motorized. So on the non-motorized, yes.
That as well as the objective of increasing the number of non-single occupancy motorized trips. And that's not this?
That's not this. What we've keyed on for our non-motorized component is your mode shift goals of getting a 10% increase in Central Issaquah and a 3% increase in the rest of the city. And we've built our fee around the projects that we believe will do that. And again, we'll talk a little bit about how we got to those. And in our rate studies, we'll show you in writing how we got to those. You've seen a lot of that. We've been in front of all of you once, and some of you twice at various committees, and we've shown you the lists of projects, and we talked about how we got there. No surprises here. You're going to see a lot of things you've seen before, but it'll all be formally bound and the I's dotted and the T's crossed. So I think, yes, I need to go back. Try not to spill the water this time.
Sort out the thing.
Right. Try that out for you. There you go.
That one. That looks
Yep.
If I hit a 5,
Yeah. Oh,
gets you somewhere to where you were.
I can get it.
Okay.
So, we're back to the first of the 3 parts of simplified concurrency. That first part is the simplified review, the concurrency capacity review, and now we know where the trips come from. And so this is going to tell us how many trips we have available. That was the 8441 for concurrency. Remember, we were going to also ask the applicant how many trips you got. And instead of making them hire a traffic consultant who has to go out and figure out how many trips on exactly which road, we just need the total number of trips that they're going to put in the system. And so this is an example that we used with you before. We've tweaked the trip end count now that we're measuring trip ends instead of trips. But we envisioned a mixed-use development. Applicant comes in, this would be a classic Central Issaquah development. They want to build 32 apartments, 13,500 square feet of office, and 5,400 square feet of retail, okay? And what we've discovered is that each of those three parts generates 20 trips each, 20 trip ends each. And so there's a total of 60 trip ends that this applicant needs from us. So how many trips did we have available? 8441. So for concurrency review, those trip ends, the 8441 that we saw, this is that same slide from Torsten's presentation, okay? We're now going to simply compare our number, 8441. That's why we call it a trip bank. We had an opening balance of 8441. We have our first customer. They want to withdraw. They want to write a check for 60 trips. So we do that, and now we're down to a mere 8,381 trips. That's still 5 Costco's, okay? It's not overbuilt. We're not going to say yes to more development than you want. This is geared exactly to the development that you have approved. But it's all available, and it's as available as simply as coming in and telling me how many square feet of office, how many square feet of retail, how many apartment buildings, and I got a spreadsheet that tells you it's 60 trips. You don't have to hire a traffic consultant to do it. Compare your 60 to my 8441, you're done. Well, you're done with concurrency. Josh, and then, go ahead.
Just a real quick question. In terms of the breakdown on that previous slide, and I think we went over that before, this is all PM peak trip generation.
Correct.
When you do the multiplication out.
Yes.
Is there any variance built in terms of the classification? In other words, if you have residential, office, and retail in a mixed-use development, it seems like from that model, you are literally assuming that all those uses will generate all 60 of those trips at the same PM peak hour.
Correct.
And I don't know where the variance comes in for the type of apartment, office, or retail, because the nature of the business and the nature of the retail, and even to some extent the nature of the residential, is more meaningful than simply saying, well, we're just going to assume this number. It, you know, the place where it's built, the type of business it is, I understand simplified concurrency. This aspect seems overly simplified, because if you're building 13,000 square foot office building and you're saying we're only going to have 60 trips total in the PM peak, I might suspect you're going to have potentially 40-something employees in a 13,000 foot office building. And even if you have a CTR program, and so not all of them are SOVs, you're going to have at least, you're going to have more than 20 trips coming just out of an office building, it just seems intuitively, at the PM peak. And then, again, you're assuming that simultaneously the people living there are going to be driving in and the retail people are going to be coming in, and it just seems very simplistic.
Okay, but it isn't. And I want you to not trust your intuition. I want you to read the report when you get it. It's all grounded in the science of trip generation. What we've done for every single land use, including these three, is we asked ITE's data set, what does that kind of land use generate in the PM peak hour? Okay, we could have asked them for the AM, we could have asked them for the average daily, but we asked for their experience with apartments. We asked for condos, we asked for single family houses, and they each have a different rate in that same PM peak hour. So we can both imagine intuitively that somebody might run a business that is off of those peaks, but the aggregate of all of the thousands of studies that drive the ITE study makes that the outlier and makes our data set relatively safe. And it means that for any given outlier we get that's too high, we'll have another one that's too low, but on the average, we're going to be quite comfortable. And I think you'll find in the rate study that we've accomplished that.
And is that average, just to follow up, is that average, is that like a national average? Is that of cities of Issaquah's size? Again, it seems like a retail building in New York City that's 5,400 square feet is going to generate a lot different trips than a retail building in, you know, a small city in Washington. And so when you say average, is it national? Is it Washington State? Is it cities of our size? Where does that come from?
It's the same data that every city in the state of Washington uses and every city in the country uses. It's national data. because this data doesn't exist at the Issaquah or the King County or the Washington State or the Western region of the United States. It's the best available data, and it is imperfect, but it is better than no data. And you're using it right now in your current transportation, have been for years, right? So there are ways to think about how it could be made more accurate, but you'd have to do hundreds of trip generation surveys in Issaquah to get a local data set. Still question?
Josh's question was along the same lines of my question
Okay.
about where the trip generation data comes from.
Right. And you'll find in our technical appendix to the report specific citations to the document, and then we'll show you the math column by column of how we got to these numbers. So we finished our last part. Remember, we have a 3-part test. The first is concurrency review, capacity review. The second is going to be the safety and operations, and the third is going to be the fees. We've just, with this, kind of wrapped up the do we have enough trips, the capacity review. So now we're going to move to how can you do that? Why did your hands not leave your wrists? Why is that so simple? And you saw this last year ago, September. The traffic model that created all those trips, or counted them, actually, it doesn't create them, and tracked them, that traffic model has all your growth in it. No more, no less. All those growth numbers we had at the early slide with the bar charts and the 10,000 new houses, that's what's in there. No more, no less. And when we put it in there, we then created a bunch of projects that make sure it preserves your level of service. Now, you're going to remember last summer we went through some workshops with Torsten. Can we afford to fix every single intersection? And you gave us the ability to come back to you with one that has 6 intersections below level of service D. You haven't agreed to that yet, so don't let anybody yell at you that you've authorized a low level of service. But you, with eyes wide open, said, wow, looking at the price tags, give us that version as the rollout recommendation. And that's what you're going to get tonight is level of service D on the average, weighted average across the board for all intersections, with 6 of them, 6 specific ones that we've named in the rate study that we're going to allow to go to E or F. But with that exception of those 6, we've bought the level of service that you want for all the rest of the intersections. And because that's all in the model, the traffic model therefore shows that the concurrency level of service has been achieved. Well, if the model shows that, all we got to do is get the applicant to live within that. That's the 8441 minus the 60. That's living within it. And so concurrency works. And the only proviso, it's got to be paid for. It only works to give away those 60 trips easily if we have a commitment that they are going to mitigate their share. And instead of what you do now, which is figuring out which intersection that applicant is going to fix, we need a check for these standard amounts of money that we're calculating, that we're going to roll out here tonight. The second of the 3-part simplified concurrency is for the larger development, 30 p.m. peak hour trips or more. And again, you saw this at last a little over a year ago. And we are no longer interested on huge traffic studies with lots of traffic consultants, a lot of computer models. We just need to know 2 things. Where are you accessing? Where's your exit point? Where's the driveway? What does that do to the safety of your property site? And what does that do to our operations? Does that jam up our traffic signal, or are you far enough away from the signal? Or do we make you put in an acceleration lane so that, and we can make you do that in addition to the simplified concurrency because you're big enough, and we will continue to keep that as part of your regulations. We're going to keep a little piece of SEPA to protect you. But what it's protecting you for is not impacts of the capacity of the system. It's protecting you for impacts on the safety and the operations. And it's a much smaller piece for the applicant, and it's a much easier piece for you. Now we're going to move to the third and last part, which is you got to pay for this. And we're going to start with some slides you've seen, and then we're going to roll out some slides you haven't seen. So the payment means we're going to update the last impact fee. It's actually the one you're operating under right now. We did it back in 2006. And we're going to recommend the creation of an additional fee, a SEPA-based mitigation fee for bicycles and pedestrians. And the reason we don't use the broader language of non-motorized or multimodal is because we don't own the transit system. So there isn't much we can do. We can encourage transit. We can beg them to come out here. We can, help do whatever we can to get them to be here. But we can't collect fees for it because we don't operate it. And then the last part of the simplified payment is Make it easy so that when the person's coming in and paying, they don't need a Cray supercomputer to figure out the calculations. It's a simple, you owe me X dollars that came from this rate table, and you write the check and we'll give you the concurrency. So now let's see what that looks like. Your current traffic impact fee, the one you're operating under today, was done in 2006. And if this format looks like the one we looked at for parks, it is. We're going to look at today, and then we're going to add a column over here what it looks like in the future. And yep, there's going to be more projects in the future. But what you got today was $70 million worth of projects, 54 million eligible for impact fees. There were going to be 18,200 trips. Remember, we're changing the vocabulary from trips to trip ends, so there's going to be a little bit of this that isn't quite directly comparable. Okay? But you divided the 54 million by the 18,000, and you're charging $2,500 a trip. That's what you're doing today. And out of that 70 million, 47 million was going to come from growth, 23 million from you. Okay? Drum roll, please. Smelling salts, please. Okay. $255 million program. And this is the one that's got 6 intersections that don't get to level of service D. Okay? 223 million of it is eligible for impact fees, but you've already approved 15,000 trips. They're vested, so they're not going to pay this. It's a responsibility that is shifted to you. We have 40,000 trips. We had that slide with the 40,000 and the 10,000 more trips for bike and ped. This is the 40,000 vehicle person trips, 40,000 person trips for vehicles. And so the math is almost doubling from $2,500 to $5,667. So a year ago when I said it might be 19,000, happily for all of us, that was way high. Okay? But it's still a very sizable increase. It's double. Okay? And this is does not include the bike ped piece, which we're going to see in a couple of slides. The share at the bottom, 90 million for growth, 167 million for us. Okay? What do the fees look like? Here's the recommended fee for traffic and for bike ped and the combined total for a single family house. $7,900 plus another $760, we want $8,600. Compared to what we're charging now, $1,700. Okay? It's that difference, which is why you don't have a really strong track record of building projects, because you haven't been charging enough to get enough money to build the projects. Okay? You had a short project list, and we just haven't been bringing in the money. With these dollars, if you adopt this as a package and charge that $8,600, you're going to generate not the 167 million that you need, but you'll generate the 90 million that you need to get from new development. That's a single family house. Here's a multifamily house, similar results. I've got them reversed. The current is on top and the future's below. $1,000 now, $5,300 in the future. Let's talk about funding strategies. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I need to talk about the bike ped fee. This is the new fee. It's driven by SEPA. You already have, as a city, established a long, well-established record of charging SEPA-based mitigation fees for things that are not covered by GMA, the Growth Management Act. You charge a fee right now for law enforcement. You charge a fee right now for City Hall general government facilities. And you're allowed to do that, and you've been doing it under SEPA. Very few cities have done that. Okay, very few. We're simply going to say, if you can do it for those, you can do it for bicycle and pedestrian facilities. So it's going to be based on SEPA, same concept. And we have identified 16 projects. Again, you've seen our project list at some of the previous sessions. It totals 49 million. Remember when it started off at 75 million? Okay, we're down to about 2/3 of that. The cost that's eligible for impact fees, however, is only about half. And the reason is, in the bicycle and pedestrian facilities, if we put in a sidewalk that's going to help people get from one place to another, existing population needs that sidewalk too. So the calculation is a piece of the total pie that says when we get to the year 2030 and we look around us and see how many of us are here in 2030, the question is how many of us were here back in 2013? And that percentage is 45% were here in 2013 and 55% were, I'm sorry, I've got that backwards, 55% were here in 2013 and 45% of the people in 2030 will be growth. So we've applied that 55-45 ratio to the 49 million and said growth, you get the 45%, you get the 21 million. And by the way, All of this will be on the open book test that's in the rate studies, so I realize we're giving you an awful lot of information this evening, but this whole video will be posted to the website, and then you'll get all of our rate studies, and then we're going to see you multiple times, so I appreciate your patience in just absorbing a lot of information all at once. Now we're going to take that $21 million and divide it by the 10,600 bicycle pedestrian trips. And I promised a short explanation about how we did that trip calculation. It wasn't part of Torsten's slide, so here's how that looks like. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. Step 1, we're going to begin with what we know about from the traffic model, the trips in vehicles. Even though we're going to wind up talking about bicycles and pedestrians, what we can count with great accuracy is the vehicle trip ends. That's the 24,180 way over at the left. But we know that those vehicles, those 24,000 vehicle trips, have more than one person in some of the vehicles. And the Puget Sound Regional Council's average is 1.35 persons per vehicle. So if we multiply the 24,000 vehicles times 1.3, the number of people in those vehicular trips is 32,000. Okay, cool. That's people in cars. What about people on bicycles and walking? We don't count them. We don't have little rubber strips across the road that they drive across. We don't have people counting them going by. We have an approved methodology. We've been using this since 1997 in Portland, Oregon, to estimate what that looks like. We're going to take the 32,000 person trips at the bottom of Step 1, move it to the top of Step 2, and use it as a starter and say, well, if 32,000 people in cars are the car mode split, and if the car mode split is 75%, 75.5%, then we can solve for X. That is, we can say what must be the total people in all the modes if 75% of them are in cars. And so you divide the 32,000 by the 75%, and we get an answer of 43,000 people, some of them in cars, some on bicycles, some walking. And we take that number, move it to the top of the third step, subtract the vehicle trips that we knew about, and the answer is our 10,616. That was the number we had over here at the bottom, okay? So now we're going to take it up again, $21 million. Go ahead.
How does that, going back to the slide, how does the 10,000 relate to the 10% mode split number?
Right.
Am I,
Yeah.
that doesn't look like 10% to me.
Okay, but these are person trips in bicycle and pedestrian out of a total of 43,000 trips. Okay, so it's about 25%. Okay. That's why it's 75.5% motorized.
I think where I'm missing it is that I was talking about a growth rate rather than the actual.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
This is the mode split that you have essentially today. We're trying to increase that by 10% in Central Issaquah, okay? But it drives the number now, okay? Another question? Okay. So our mitigation fee is to take the 21 million, divide it by the 10,600 trips, and the answer is $2,000 per trip end. Now, we already had like $5,000 per trip end for the cars. Now we're adding another $2,000 per trip end for the bike and ped. But there are way fewer bike ped trips out of a house or out of an office building per square foot than there are car trips. It's the 75-25 mode split issue. So it's going to be $2,000 a trip, but you're going to generate fewer trips of this type for any given kind of development. And so we're going to, I want to talk about the funding strategies. We're going to have 2 slides on funding strategies for transportation. These are the things you're doing now, and then there's another slide to help us think about that $167 million we got to come up with. Things you're doing now, very successful at grants, the new impact fees, the vested property owner's contribution, the approval that you just made from Costco was part of that, the 20-some-odd million dollars is part of that. Real estate excise tax, and there's a cash balance in the mitigation fund. That's all stuff that you have or have for sure coming in. To help make up the difference, the very top one is the one we're recommending, that we would ask you to act on as part of the package to adopt this bicycle pedestrian fee. Other things that you could do that some other cities have done. Some cities have gone to their voters and said, approve a vehicle license tab. Some cities, Redmond and Renton in particular, have both gone and negotiated with their business community a business license, not based on $100 a business, but based on $100 per employee per year, with the money dedicated to specific projects that the businesses saw the value of and approved. You could do what Kirkland did and go to the voters and ask for a property tax increase. highly successful, it's a permanent levy lid lift for them, and they're going to really do well with that. And they had a great package that explained to the voters why they needed to do it. You could ask for voter-approved bonds, and there's a sales tax that you could ask for under a transportation benefit district. So we're not here tonight to decide which ones or how much. Okay, that conversation we need to have someday. It could happen early next year, late next year. What we need to know is the sense of opportunity. And I've worked with finance director, with Diane. We have capacity. Today we need to get the rest of the system in front of you, because if you don't like the rest of the system, you won't have to worry about this. Okay? But if you like the rest of the system, then this will be the last thing you get the worry beads out about. Okay? For tonight, we're going to move on. Remember that example development, 32 apartments and 13,000 square feet and 5,000 square feet? This is what they would pay with the fees that we're recommending. $403,800 plus $38,000. See what I mean about the bike ped fee is actually rather small, even though the cost per trip is $2,000 per trip. They don't generate very many trips. So you got a total bill of $442,000, which is a lot of money, except that mixed-use development was going to cost $15 million. So all of a sudden, $440,000 is like maybe 3% of that total. Okay? And so as we apply this, we want to remember how this worked. It was easy for that applicant to be told, you got 60 trips, we got 8,400. Next step? Next step, give us your review of where your driveway is. Thank you. Move it 50 feet. Last step, bring your checkbook, $440,000. I know you consider that painful, but you're building a $15 million project. It's less than 3% of the total. And so, as a rule, these fees don't wind up stopping the development at all. So how can these payments be so simple? The projects that they're paying for are the ones that were in the model that achieve the level of service for concurrency. And so the growth in the traffic model needs to pay these fees in order to pay their share of the projects. Okay? And therefore, their payment is buying them and you the level of service. That's how we marry the fees to the concurrency. And it all works with our usual caveat, the ifs. In this case, if you decide to charge this full fee, okay, and if you're able to pay your share. Those are huge ifs. That's why we're going to have multiple meetings with you. We're going to have another work session of the whole council in December. We're going to meet Infrastructure Committee twice before that. And we think that we'll have you to a position where you could be ready to make a decision in December. We've scheduled that. But if you're still fussing and feuding with it, we're here to work with you with what we think is a useful concept. But we know it's complicated. So I promised comparisons, okay? But I'm going to make you sit through Randy's lecture on why comparisons don't matter. And then I'm going to surrender and give them to you anyway, okay? These fees, for most development, notice the word most, are very, very small percentages of the total cost. I'll tell you right now, if you want to build a daycare center, it's not a small percentage, okay? The rates for daycare centers in all cities are high because the trip generation is so high. So we need to think about what that does. But we don't want to throw out the whole system because we can think of one land use that's too expensive, okay? For most development, the fee is like the example I gave you, 3%, 2%, 4%. It isn't a deal killer. And then you're going to compare yourself to other cities, not to other cities that don't have fees. Your competitors already have fees. So now it's a question of your 3% versus their 2.8 or their 4.1. It's not comparing you to zero. So it's another reason why the comparisons don't teach you an awful lot. We're going to do them, but just take them with a grain of salt. And then the reminder that we are talking about real estate. And what are the 3 rules of real estate? Location, location, location. Way more important than any amount of the fees that we're talking about charging. If we were talking about charging fees that were 50% of development costs or 80% of development costs, I would agree with you. We've turned this upside down. But we're talking about, for most cases, very low fees. So between location and the availability of affordable land and accessibility to that land, these things are what real estate investors and decision makers make their decisions on, not on impact fees of $400,000 on a $15 million project. And there are limitations if you are going to do comparisons. If you're going to go, Randy, I want to see the comparisons anyway, and I'm going to give them to you, okay? Keep in mind that the cities we're going to show you are different than you are, okay? Some of them have different revenue sources. Some have B&O taxes, you do, some don't, okay? Some have local transportation benefit districts, some don't. The list is long of what they have, what they don't have. And then let's take the things that we both have. Issaquah has sales tax, Bellevue has sales tax. Bellevue has how many car dealers? Issaquah has how many car dealers? Huge sales tax difference, okay? So we can compare ourselves to Bellevue's rates, and I think we're going to, but one of the reasons they're lower is they got a lot of other money that we don't have. They have cost differences, the cost elements that they put in there are different, there are policy differences, there are choices on how much to charge, and there are locational differences. So, okay, I give up. You get to see the comparisons, okay? This is the park impact fees, a column for single family, a column for multifamily. I've put us at the top, our current rate on the top row. The next row is if we charge the new rate but only for residential, and the next row is if we charge the new rate for residential and businesses. And we've compared ourselves in descending order of dollar amounts. The next highest is Mill Creek, then Kirkland, then Redmond. There's one of those cities that does have an impact fee for commercial property. Sammamish, Bellevue, and Renton. The reason Renton is the year 2016 and after, they're thresholding theirs up, and they'll get to their maximum rate year after next. So, on this chart, we were already in first place. And now we're going to be less than we were, but we're still going to be in first place. Unless we bring businesses in which case we can get into second place. If we want to be in 10th place, we need to not have a park impact fee, okay? And all those other caveats about why it doesn't make a difference. Let's look at transportation. This slide is just for single family house, and then I'm going to do another slide for the condos and apartments. Same routine, us at the top, the neighbors from top to bottom. We're not in first place. Sammamish is in first place. A place that they cherish and they don't want you to knock them off the pedestal, okay? And we didn't get close. But we can certainly slip into second place with our new fees. Right now, we're so low, we're just barely above Newcastle, okay? Now, there are other cities. There are about 75 cities in the state that have transportation impact fees and about 77 that have park impact fees. So I could give you a longer list, but I tried to pick, with staff's help, the ones that seem to be relevant that you normally think of and look at for yourselves. But if you want it as part of our meeting with committees, we can give you the whole list. I'm just going to remind you every time I hand that out, it still doesn't matter, that people don't make decisions based on that. Now we're going to talk about why that is. Well, first we're going to talk about multifamily houses, basically the same message. Sammamish is in first. We could get ourselves into second place. Right now we're next to last. So a reminder, the reason that these comparisons don't matter, the fee we did for that example was only 2.5% of a $500,000 house. No, I'm sorry, I gave you the mixed use example. Now I'm switching over to a single family house. And for a single-family house, the fees would be 2.5% of a $500,000 house. So on most developments, certainly on single-family houses, there's no effect. And the cities we're comparing to don't have zero. They have fees, so it's just a little difference between us and them. And where do they want to live? What kind of land do we have? What's available? And what is location about? So in case, after all of the comparisons, you're thinking, if there's something wrong with that, that's going to matter. I want to show you what other cities have learned about what happens to affordability, to competitiveness, to development, and to fairness and equity. Affordability. If we do this, don't we become unaffordable? Well, here's what other cities learned. Market prices changed hardly at all because the fee is such a tiny piece of the total, okay? You adopt these bigger fees, your housing prices are going to go up by that much. Not by this much, by that much. And that's what other cities learned. Josh.
There's one tiny thing I'm a little hung up on, which is when you say adopt the bigger fees, I see that for single and multifamily residential. On the commercial end, the number, the per trip number actually seems to have gone down from our current dollar amount on the slide you showed, unless I was misreading that.
We didn't show a commercial for transportation.
Or what, it was 3 slides back. You mentioned in the context I thought of commercial, but maybe it's...
This example is single family.
Okay, keep going. Sorry.
That's all right.
Back up.
These are multifamily, single family.
There it is.
Okay, that's parks.
Okay.
And the only commercial that's there are just, remember, relatively few cities have commercial for parks. but every city has commercial for transportation. We haven't put this in the slides. It will be in your package with the rate study. We'll list every single land use, furniture stores, convenience stores open at night, convenience stores open in the morning. We got 60 or 70 land uses for you.
What caught my eye, though, is the current compared to the other two below it, which would be the proposed residential with business. And if it doesn't make a difference on what you're now discussing on the future slide in terms of actually citing your business, then why would we consider lowering the revenue stream to bring those numbers down? Why not come up with something that produces the same amount of revenue that we currently have?
Right. The methodology that we've used for your current fee, that we're using for the update, that a lot of cities used, is something called investment per capita. We take what you own, we assign a replacement value to it, we divide it by your population and go, this is what it is, $2,000 a person, $2,500 a person. All you newcomers, you got to match that. We just need to make sure you get the same investment that we've made for ourselves. We don't want you using up our parks, but we don't want you making our parks better than they already are. Just match it. So the difference between the 2006 version and the current version is the investment per capita actually went down by about $500 a person. That was one of the real early slides. So you've still been investing a lot, but you've been growing faster than your investment's been growing, so we slid down a little bit. Okay? So affordability, market prices don't really affect much by impact fees. And it's the other factors that drive these decisions. It isn't the fees, it's the location, and the cost of land and the overall market conditions. All right, competitive. We've been talking about comparing ourselves to the neighbors. Won't development go to all the neighbors? Well, development continued in their cities, little slow growth places like Redmond, Kirkland, Issaquah. You've had fees for years. Did you notice development stopping? Not so much. The fees don't drive away development. And the fees produce benefits. Unlike just general taxes, people who pay impact fees grump, hate them, don't want to, would rather not have to pay them. But you can demonstrate, and the knowledgeable investor knows they're getting value for the money. You're going to build that intersection, buy this parkland, to get something for it. And again, the decisions are really driven not by the fees, but by locational and market decisions. So, and it's a small portion of the cost. So development. Won't our development slots, this is sort of the flip side of won't they go someplace else? Well, won't we not get any development? Well, in all the cities that adopted impact fees, including Issaquah, well, except for when the market fell apart for all of us, 2008, 2009, when the state of Washington has had growth, we've had growth, and we've had impact fees. So I think we need not to fear them just because we're talking about making somewhat of an increase in them. And besides, the developer who pays the fee doesn't eat that cost out of their profit margins. They're passing it along to their tenants or ultimate owners, okay? Is this fair? Doesn't development already pay a bunch of money? Don't you build a new house, to build a new office building, they pay a lot of taxes? Sure. But what other cities have found and what you have found is the money that they pay in taxes doesn't go into the account that buys the parks and buys the roads. It goes into the general government fund that helps buy the police and the fire and the parks people, but it doesn't pay for the infrastructure cost. The only exception to that is the one-time real estate excise tax, and we've already taken that into account in our calculations and reduced our costs by their contribution to that, so we're not double dipping. If new development did pay for itself, as some old master builder studies tried to claim, we wouldn't be allowed to charge impact fees. They would have proven to us that we have more money, that we're awash in cash, and we can't charge them. It's because we can prove we don't have the money in the account we need for buying these infrastructure items that we wind up justifying impact fees. And, talk about equity. If they don't pay their share, who does? Current taxpayers, not the people who are the growth, but the people who would be subsidizing the growth. So here's your policy choices for the evening. Got about 4 or 5 more slides to lay out some choices for you. I'm going to give you a recommendation in each of these areas, and I'm going to give you an alternative. Here's parks. We're recommending that you adopt the fee for residential development. Those are the numbers at the top. We're also recommending that you adopt the non-residential development, and you've been seeing the slide with $2.20. That was the average. This is what the actual rates would be. And we only have these 4 broad categories. So any business that builds in Issaquah, we're going to have to find which of those categories is the closest fit, because we only have data for these 4 categories. We have a $46 million growth package, and we have a funding strategy that pays for all of that. That's our recommendation.
Hold on, Randy.
Go ahead.
You have a funding strategy that pays,
For 100% of parks, not for transportation. That slide we did about 15.
24.5
Yep.
is from impact fee, 22.2 from established current sources. Okay,
Correct.
that's the part.
Yep, no new sources needed for parks.
Thank you.
Okay? With transportation, that's the other story. That's the 167 million we have to talk about. But for parks, we're already there. But if you have concerns, I'm going to show you 2 alternatives. Now, don't blink, because the slide's going to look like it didn't move, but a number or 2 is going to change, and it's going to be in bright red, so that if it isn't in red, it's the same as this slide. Alternative number 1, okay? We don't have to have the 4 different categories of business. We can have an average. We did this a year ago for Edmonds, and they chose the average for all businesses, okay? Pros and cons either way. We can talk about those later in committee. It's a choice. Doesn't change anything else. It just changes the piece of the pie, which business pays what portion. Okay, keep watching. We're going to have another red. Everything else is going to stay the same. No red for businesses. That was the question you asked. Okay? And so the numbers for residential go up compared to what they were. And you saw that in some other slides, so this is not new news. So we think you've got at least 3 policy options, and we welcome more as we meet with you in committee and as a work session. We're not trying to make it too complicated, but we're also trying to tell you, gee, there's only one way out of this, okay? Now let's do the same thing for transportation. Recommendation for concurrency, that you should try the simplified approach, adopt the trip calculator, the trip bank, and the fees. We recommend that you adopt the level of service that we asked you to let us research last summer, and we didn't ask you to adopt it then. We are now recommending that you seriously consider level of service D across the board on a weighted average for all intersections, and 6 named intersections will be allowed to go to E or F. What keeps those from going from F to G to H to Z is the weighted average of D for all of them. If 1 or 2 of them start falling off the cliff, they'll drag the total below the D, and that will shut us down. So we have a limit, not just a limit on those individual intersections. They really are basically, what's the reverse of a cap? There's a floor under which they can't go. We're recommending the cost per trip for traffic of $5,600, for bike ped for $2,000, that the projects for transportation be about 40 projects for $305 million, plus another, I didn't put it on here, but the bike ped projects, another 16 projects for $40 million. The funding strategy here is $64 million from the new impact fee, $27 million from vested development. The largest part of that is your Costco development agreement, but there are some others. $95 million that we think you will get from established revenue sources, that you don't have to raise fees, charges, or anything else, and then the missing piece of the puzzle, the $119 million. That's the one we need to talk about and solve before this all winds up 3 years down the pike, but we don't have to have this all money in the bank before we move forward. I'm going to show you I'm going to take questions on this, and then I'm going to do like I did before. I'm going to show you in bright red 2 policy alternatives. Let's take some questions.
Just a simple one here on the math with the projects for concurrency and the 305 million, but those aren't all growth costs on that line apparently, because we can only get 64 million from impact fees. So the 305 million projects for concurrency, where's the, I don't know, I'm sorry. I've been listening so carefully, it's hard to speak.
You're doing great, and nobody's got notes. Nobody's got a piece of paper in front of them. I'm delighted, and I'm grateful at how much you've taken in so far.
Let's say it this way. How come of the transportation projects for concurrency, and maybe it's just the way that it's stated, how come only 64 million of it is proposed for impact fees?
We talked about this real briefly, but I've said an awful lot very quickly tonight, so this one might have gone by you and others, okay? But you might recall my talking about how we had 25,000 trips to give away, but 15,000 of them we had already approved. Yeah, the 64 million is going to come from the 8,000 trips that we can still charge for. But the 15,000 trips that are already approved, they may be committed like Costco to millions of dollars. That's in the next item. And some of them are committed to not very many millions of dollars, but they're part of 15,000 trips that are gone. And so we're only going to expect 64 million from actual impact fee cash as opposed to growth.
So we got 27.5 million for the first 15,000 trips, and we need to get 64 million out of the remaining 84.
I didn't do it. I don't know how that happened.
Just trying to understand what you're telling me.
I think you're understanding it very well. I just don't have a way to explain how we got here.
I just might.
Let's look at two alternative slides, just like we did for parks. Again, everything that stays in black doesn't change. Watch for the red. Oh, nope, never mind. There's lots of red. I forgot I was going to remind you of Torsten's slides about the level of service. Okay, remember we saw this last summer, and it's the right-hand column. Those top two in yellow, those are two of the 6 that you would be approving, and the rate study lists all 6. Okay, and this is just a reminder of how we got to those 6, because you looked at some, the purple column with action number 2 had almost no intersections that were below level of service, but the cost was like astronomical, and that's why we backed away from it. Now we're going to go back to the black and the red. Okay, this is the one we saw before, but the first alternative is, let's just reduce the fees. We want to try and make everything else work, but we just think the impact fees are too high. Even though Randy has lectured me about competitiveness and comparisons, I don't believe him. This is the new, not the race to the top for education, this is the race to the middle. That's what we do in impact fees, okay? And so you want to pick a number that middles us out. So I didn't put a number there, I just put reduced. And by however much you reduce it, there's red at the bottom, because the 119 is going to go up. There should actually be a red next to the 64 million, because it's going to go down, okay? So tonight I'm not giving you any specific numbers, but as you talk to us individually and as committees, we can mess with some alternatives, not an infinite number of them, but we can try some, and then you'll find out that if you cut the rates by half, then your share goes up, and okay, we can do that. There is another alternative, okay, instead of reducing the fees. It's reducing the fees by also changing the level of service so we don't reduce them as much. So instead of 6 intersections, we might have 12 intersections that are bad, or 24. And then that might reduce the fees not quite so much. We might have fewer than 40 projects, because if we have more intersections we don't have to fix, then we don't need 40 projects, we don't need 305 million, which means the fees go down, and I didn't bother with the bottom of it because it just all gets redone from scratch. Point is, you have choices. And the reason you ran for office is you wanted hard choices, and I've given you some. Bravo, Randy, okay? That's where we are. These are hard choices. But you have choices. And so we're going to wrap this up with a couple closing policy issues unrelated to the dollars that we will be bringing back to you. These 3. You have right now an exemption for low-income housing. We're fine with you if you keep it. We're fine if you don't keep it. But there's been a law change, and we need to change yours to conform to the law. It has to do with what % of the exemption that you give that you no longer have to pay for. Remember, we were all taught we always had to pay for exemptions? They changed the law and said for low-income housing, the first 80% of the fee that we exempt, we don't have to pay for. But if we give 100% exemption, we have to pay for the last 20%. We'll go through that in detail again with individuals and with committees, but we need for you to bring that into line. Number 2 on the hit parade. The legislature added a few years ago an outright exemption, and you don't have to pay for it, but you are not allowed to charge regional transit facilities any impact fees. Okay? And last, and this is actually where we began our conversation about change of use, and I said you would see a slide, here it is. You currently have a provision in which if somebody comes in and proposes to change from a furniture store to a pizza parlor, or from an office building to a gas station in the same building, you go through calculations right now. And you could do that, you could continue to do that. But we need for you to know we didn't put any of those trips in the traffic model. So all the 40,000 trips and the 15,000 trips and the 29,000 trips and the 8,400 trips, none of those had any net increases or decreases for change of use. because we can't predict when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen. It's not growth data that you could give to Torsten that he could plug into the model. It's totally unexpected. And in our experience, over long periods of time, it's a wash. The next person, we get to charge an extra $100,000, but the year after that, somebody else, we should have given them $100,000, but we have written it so we don't have to. That's not really totally fair. So we're just suggesting that it isn't an exemption. You don't have to pay for it. They're not built into the model. They don't exist from our viewpoint, and therefore we won't count them for concurrency or for impact fees. We think we just need to remove the change of use provision from your setup. And frankly, most of your neighbors do not charge for change of use. We're kind of the outliers, okay? So we're not alone, but mostly. Josh.
Can we go back to the transportation slide? I didn't realize we were kind of changing off of that.
Sure.
I want to let you get through it. So there's a policy question in there in terms of the how many more than 6 intersections, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we started down this road of having 6 specific fringe intersections at E or F, and I guess my first point or question is you made a statement earlier about how, because of the weighted average, it doesn't really matter if those intersections go a little bit lower because it's a weighted average, but it prevents them from going to, as you said, G, H, I, J,
Z,
whatever.
right.
Well, Z, yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there is no G through Z in LOS. It's F. There's only F. You can get really bad F.
But that's the point. So you and I would agree that semantically it's always F, but when the ratio goes from 1.01, that's 101% crowded, that's an F.
Right.
To 2.59, that's uber crowded. To 4.0, it's not even a good parking lot anymore. Those are, in my joking language, that's the GHZs. But you are correct that it's still F.
So my point is that by writing it into code saying these intersections will be at E or F, it lumps even the uber F or the parking lot scenario into that. And if you do that by code, then the weighted average has no effect in terms of those intersections, because no matter how bad they get, they will always be quote unquote F. So if the code actually included no worse than a certain volume over capacity or some other metric other than just using the categorization of E or F, then there really would be, in terms of a weighted average, an impact of those intersections, because if they do get so bad to be 4 instead of 1, then it really is going to affect the network as a whole. So that...
No, I was hoping that was the point I had been making. Maybe I didn't do it very elegantly, that we've got 6 intersections that we're recommending that we allow to go from E to F minus to G to Z, okay? But our point is that if even one of them starts looking at about an H or an M or a P in the alphabet, okay, it gets to 3 or 3.5 or 4, its contribution to the weighted average will drag the whole weighted average below D, and that'll trigger an immediate shutdown of concurrency for everybody.
But how? Because it'll always be F. It won't be P or Z.
But a weighted average is the sum of all the intersections added together and weighted for the amount of traffic volume through each of them. So that intersection is only 1 out of 80, but when it's got the ugliest ratio of all, it's going to dominate the other 79, and it will drive down the weighted average.
Okay, yeah, as long as the code recognizes the V over C as the critical element, not the letter. So my second point on this is in terms of the 6 intersections, and I know we've talked about this a little bit before. I still have a really big problem with those 6 intersections that were chosen in the run. And I brought up the central area plan, and there's a great map in the in the circulation element, and it identifies the central area streets. So you look at like 12th and Maple and all those streets in that central core district, and it defines them as core streets. And it says that they would carry slightly higher volumes of vehicular traffic than pedestrian priority streets. There would be high priority to pedestrians. There would be basically higher densities. And then when you look at comparative streets in the central area plan, like boulevards or parkways, those are supposed to be traffic moving efficiently. So you've got faster cars, fewer pedestrian, lower density. The model run is, in my opinion, inapposite to the central area plan. it does the exact opposite of the central area plan in terms of providing for an LOSD on average in the central core, where those streets, as a matter of transportation policy, are intended to be a higher, worse LOS. And so I understand the philosophical argument of we don't want to build more to help regional traffic get out of the city at those fringe intersections, but by having E's and F's on the fringe and having D's in the middle of the donut, that is not what the central area plan calls for. So you're going to be spending money building to avoid the higher densities and the slower speeds in the central area by trying to get those streets to a D. And then you're going to have all these other intersections which serve Issaquah residents that are not going to get the same level of attention because we're okay with them dropping to an E or an F. And so it's just, I just see it as being very backwards to what we've adopted as our central area policy.
Help me here. I may misunderstand, and this is probably where I wish I did have Torsten to help me, but when the Central Issaquah Plan was adopted, it included a pretty serious analysis of transportation, and there was some understanding of what the level of service would be. And I haven't seen any document, I'm not personally aware of any, that changed the level of service from D everywhere, which is what you have now. So I've been assuming that the Central Issaquah Plan was assuming D everywhere, including in Central Issaquah. So I'm having trouble connecting with your statement that it was actually intended to be worse than that, because I don't see any evidence that it was intended to be worse than that.
It's vis-a-vis the other intersections that we're dropping off to E's and F's. And so when you've got the higher density, it's a recognition saying that with higher density comes slower speed, comes lower level of service, lower meaning worse in that context. And so it's comparative to the quote-unquote fringe intersections and what we're doing with those. And so we have this opportunity through this concurrency revision to shape transportation policy, not just financial policy. And the idea is if you're going to expect higher density and slower speeds in the central area, maybe it still comes out to a D, but then that should be a higher density and slower speed and worse LOS than outside of that. And so then you could say, well, that's a D, but then we shouldn't let the outside of that get worse than the inside of that.
Okay.
And that's why I think Bellevue has different zones, because they have a recognition that their downtown core is exactly like what I'm describing.
Right, but their downtown core is half the size of Issaquah, so we're not well built for zones. I mean, it would be, and plus there's just
that's why I'm not suggesting zones,
right.
But I'm saying the principle of higher density, lower LOS, worse LOS than on the fringe.
Right, and I do recall, and again, we will, and Charlie and Dave help me remember to get back to Torsten on this, because my recollection is that while the concept of allowing the worst level of service because of the higher density in the central core, clearly, I mean, that's what Manhattan is about. You know, we accept really, really low level of service, bumper-to-bumper traffic in New York City and Manhattan, because that's what you get for that high level of density. So I understand the concept. I seem to recall Torsten also telling us that it wasn't just we want to punish the outside intersections, or we want to punish the outsiders using the outside intersections. It was also the extraordinary cost of several of those, that it was going to be just bazillions of dollars for a very low return compared to the solutions in the central city.
Yeah, and I had a chance to talk to Torsten about these models and these 6 intersections, and I recall that part of it was also that these intersections on the perimeter of the city, a lot of the things that go into the difficulty of solving the problems are things that we have no control over, right? So Issaquah Falls City Road, the intersection up there is really beholden on a number of regional traffic issues that we don't have direct control over. And so I think that's one of the reasons why you have those 6 specific intersections, and they're on the edge of the city, not because there's any urge to make traffic easier in the center of the city and not as good at the perimeter, but just a recognition that we have very little control over a lot of things that go into those intersections. So to pour a lot of money into them without commensurate ability to influence the traffic coming in from external locations is a difficult proposition.
Thanks for that reminder. I recall now Yeah, Torsten said something like that. Other comments?
Before we leave that, I have a good image in my mind of your early slide where you had the trip beginning and end. And the bottom up, the bottom was regional. The second one up was the people who don't live here but work here. The one above that are the ones that
Live here, work
live here,
elsewhere.
don't work here, or whatever.
Yep.
And then the one above that are the lucky people.
Yeah.
They don't. Everything happens right here in town. And I think these intersections that he's referring to, it's the regional. The trip end and begin is probably not in Issaquah. If I can correlate your explanation of that type of trip and about relative proximity, there's only we can the growth that we can account for that with trip ends inside Issaquah is only part of the impact or the
Correct.
feed
Correct.
at those intersections.
So I think between us, we're remembering kind of all of Torsten's messages here. It can be expensive. It can be something we don't regulate. We don't issue concurrency on those external trips. We can't charge fees to make them contribute from external trips. So it really is problematic. I do take Josh's point that all else being equal, we would normally expect the higher density area to be the first one to have the worst level of service. But all else isn't apparently equal in Issaquah, at least as I understand it so far. So I had maybe one or two more slides. Oh, I had one more, the finish line. So today is the 10th, and we're presenting our recommendations to you. As we have done throughout this project, we've been in touch with you regularly and frequently, almost to the point I think Charlie said at the beginning of this you were going to be sick of seeing us. I hope that isn't true, but we're going to see the Infrastructure Committee twice at a regular meeting on the 20th and at a special meeting on December the 2nd. And before the November 20th one, in fact, probably by the end of this week or this weekend, all of you, including Infrastructure Committee, will have all of the technical documents. They're only about 20 or 30 pages apiece, but they're mostly numbers and formulas. But it's all there, transparency, full disclosure. It's like we've done in your current impact fees. So 2 meetings with Infrastructure Committee, and then we've scheduled to come back with you as we are here today. It's a little unusual in your procedure. Mostly you give something to a committee, it comes back to the whole council, and you go on and vote. We just thought this one everybody's got questions about, and so after infrastructure really drills into it, we want to give everybody a chance to have another conversation like this. Hopefully not quite as late and quite as long, but as long as you need. And then if at that point you're feeling like, okay, a lot of tough questions, but you're ready to go, then we think as early as, but not earlier than the 15th of December, you could put this up for a vote, and you could make it effective as early as January the 1st. Or you could vote on it in December and make it effective mid-January, late January. It doesn't have to be the next few weeks. We committed to you a year ago that we would do this year. We did not commit that you had to adopt it this year. We're ready for you to adopt it. We think we've got really workmanlike stuff here for you, but that's your decision, and you get to ask us the hard questions and really talk to each other about it. And with that, I'm looking forward to seeing you in small groups, and again, we're going to have some deep conversations about a lot of these issues. More questions before I leave. Oh, okay. Thanks.
Okay. Randy, thank you. Okay, I know it looks like I'm going to get to see a lot of you.
Yes.
Looking forward to that. But because I have my bigger group here, there were a couple concerns I had that I know we'll talk in more detail about in committee. But about exceptions. Now, if I remember right, there's something like $167 million city responsibility cost. Okay. When we have exceptions listed in here, does that increase that number?
So the exception for low-income housing is the first one that was on my slide, and that's actually going to get better for you because right now if you accept them, you have to pay 100% of their fee, and the law allows you to not have to pay the first 80% of that. So that's the first answer. The second answer is the next exception on the slide was regional transit, and the law said you have to exempt them, but thankfully the law said you don't have to pay for them. So that doesn't make that one worse either, okay? And then the last one isn't an exemption. It's our recommended change in policy on change in use. And what we're saying is we're not exempting them. Like a lot of cities, they should never have been part of the equation in the first place. They're not a part of our calculations this time because they're not in Torsten's model. They just simply don't exist. And we don't think that's a bad thing. Yeah, you can come and prove to me that this house got turned into that pizza parlor and they should have paid $80,000. Yeah, but across the street, the pizza parlor turned into a house and we should have given them their money back. Over the totality of all of these changes in use, they're close to a wash. And I believe, Dave, that we're researching some data from our last 5 or 6 years of concurrency data, and we'll be able to tell you exactly how many trips we got net additions and net losses from all those changes in use. But even if it's a net, I mean, even if Sheldon was here and saying, I want every dollar, don't give any, don't let anybody out at the door without it, they're not part of the model. We really don't have a defensible basis for charging them because they're not growth to us.
Okay, and I think that on the committee, we may be able to talk about that more in detail, but on the general level, one of my concerns about the exemptions is, first of all, would it cost us more money? But second of all, are we allowing impacts in the city that we are not fixing? And then we get into the problem that we are now, where traffic is the biggest problem in our city because we've exempted and said, well, nobody's going to pay for it. So what do we do about that? I haven't answered that question. That's a weighty question for me that I hope that we will address.
That's why I'd like to get you the data that Dave and I are working on about the actual number of trips that increased and the actual number that decreased and what the net was over a period of time. Because I think what we're going to find is, taken as a group, it's almost a wash. There might be plus or minus, $50,000 or $100,000 over an 8-year period. There might be individuals who had to pay $150,000 or somebody else that should have gotten a refund for $75,000. But taken as a group, I think you're going to be okay. Burden's on us to prove that to you, or else reopen this question.
Okay, well, I think I'd aired and got some people thinking with me. Maybe we can
Good.
have other conversations about that. And then on a different one, on page 77 to 102, where it's methods of mitigation, 3.74.060, is that mitigation of any impacts?
That section of your code
Yeah.
is all of your impacts that you cover by SEPA. We include it there because we're amending down near at the very end of the list. We're adding in a new item, which is the bike ped fee, and we're amending the name of and giving a new date to the transportation fee and the park fee.
Okay.
It's essentially a technical requirement that your code has to say, we're operating under SEPA and these are our policies, and then it adopts them by reference.
Okay, we can get into the details another time. Thank you.
Okay.
Do you have already factored into all of your figures the low-income housing, affordable housing exemption?
Because the state law changed, and we are going to ask you to adopt your code to take advantage of that, where you no longer have to pay for 100%. If you exempt 100%, you'd only have to pay for 20%. That 20%, there have been so few of those, and that's such a small piece of money, we didn't add it to the city share. Okay? We don't think it's material, but we could research it for you, but it's not built into these numbers.
Okay, thanks.
I think it was more of a question for staff, and it was about outreach and transparency. I know we got a letter from Master Builders, but I'm not sure if it's because you reached out to them or because they've been paying attention and decided to give you comments. I'm not sure that they represent the majority of the kinds of developers that we might see in the next few decades as Central Issaquah builds out. So who else have we reached out to? Who do we intend to reach out to? And at what point would that input come into these meeting dates so we can kind of hear from the development community before we're into, taking votes at, public meeting and voting on the same night? I kind of like to know where they stand.
I'll start. We've been reaching out to the Master Building Association, yes we have. They represent a lot of the single-family home builders, some multifamily. We had a meeting with a couple of the home builders, so a reaction from one single-family developer. Was pulling the bed, so we had some interaction with that. You can't hear me. Yeah, just and the Chamber of Commerce also, so we're going to on that thought. But
So, well, you've heard what I said, so you want to add to that?
I'll add a little bit. Go ahead, Charlie. But I think part of this is just, when we had developed, if you recall, the reason we kind of started this was we had the fundamental problem with how do we define concurrency for builders. So when we had builders and developers looking at the mall property, for example, we ran into real problems being able to say, well, this is what your concurrency is, and then this is what your rate is going to be. And so we had a couple goals. One was to simplify it, and this is like one of the most simple systems I think I've ever seen. So I think that goal is like a check mark. We're there. It's really simple. You come in. We researched it and based it very similarly to the Redmond model, and we'll get there. And then the second issue was trying to recover the appropriate amount of cost for trips that get generated in the city. And so I think, the goal here is to do that. What we've heard is everyone's feeling a lot better today than they were about the $19,000 number that got thrown out a few months ago. For example, the mall property, talking to that developer, they're feeling a lot better at that $7,000 to $8,000 number than they were at $19,000. And they do appreciate the fact that the concurrency amount is much simpler. They don't have to run the models. It's going to be in here and they'll get a number really quickly.
I would just add that, as Dave mentioned, we've been working closely with master builders for months on this project. We're also working with the chamber. We've been in touch with Matt. We've had multiple meetings with Matt and the chamber, and we are intending to go and present. We wanted to wait until really the fees got out there, because otherwise we're talking methodology with folks in the community, and that is a lot more difficult discussion to gel around than actually talking about fees and what does it really mean to you. So now that we've got this information out, we'll be amping this up over the next few weeks. We've had other meetings, as Dave mentioned, with some other developers. I know I talked with Rallies a little bit. And to Bob's point, it is about simplification. We've been simplifying across the board, really, a whole bunch of things related to development services, and this is a continuation of that theme.
Charlie, can I just add, because the one thing I didn't hear any of us really responding to that was part of your question was, if Central Issaquah starts to develop and we get different kinds of development, not single-family homes, which is what the master builders are about, who would we hear from? And it's hard to find those folks in organized groups and track them down. There is an organization called NAIOP, the National Association of Industrial and Office Parks, okay? But they have not paid any attention to what we're doing. We could reach out to them one more time and see if we can get them to pay attention. In terms of some of the mixed-use developments that you'll get there, or essentially large multifamily, those are primarily property owners and investors. There are a few national corporations who might want to come in and put in an apartment or a condo complex, but that's an investment decision that we can't anticipate. So we're not trying to avoid it. We don't know how to find them. And we're hoping that the property owners will go, I got a buyer or I've got a developer, and have them or the property owner represent their concerns and interests and be here. We've been open at all the meetings, but it's not a real exciting subject until you see yourself getting a bill for $400,000, and yeah.
And can I follow up? Just two quick points on that. I would think that any developer that had contacted us in the last few years that has or has not done something in Issaquah at least deserves some sort of notice electronically by email that says you might want to go see this presentation on our website. They've already expressed an interest in Issaquah. Maybe they built something. Maybe they plan to build something else. The second thing I was looking at, and I think this piece would help me with the policy questions that we have, is what does somebody like the Urban Land Institute think about this? I mean, if they would weigh in and say not just statistics about, I like the statistics you provided about cities not showing, impacts, but I'd like to, we're being asked to make some decisions, some policy decisions. I'd like to hear from some other think tanky group that says, that sounds like a great direction, or if you go that direction, there are potential pitfalls. Not that they're going to happen, but just some sort of opinion like that. And I do not know which group would best represent the kinds of builders that we're anticipating. But I got to figure there's a few more out there. And if we poke them and say, please look at this presentation we saw tonight and provide input or not, I would be happy. But just saying they're hard to find, I think we need to try a little harder.
Good. Did you have a second follow-up? Okay. Anything else? Have I reached the warn you out threshold?
I think the council has, there's no indication of any more questions or feedback, so, oh, you do? Pardon me, Tola, before we
I'm
move
sorry.
on.
I do. So it's hard for me to evaluate this without evaluating an overall systemic approach to infrastructure. And so I have a hard time with 95.2 million from established current sources and 119.1 million from potential additional sources, because this system, although very well defined and you did a very good job explaining a very complicated subject, really doesn't cover as large of a fraction of the aggregate 305 million as I guess maybe I originally thought it might. So I think we are going to need to decide what we want to do with this, but it's going to be very hard to do without evaluating that $95 million piece and that $119 million piece. I'm not sure how to do that. So I guess I just want to throw that out to my fellow council members. It's difficult.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. Actually, that's a really good point. I would echo that, and I think, Bob, that if it would be good to see some scenarios. I mean, how could it be achieved? I know Randy had a list of other revenue sources.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're asking. I mean, what scenarios? Just a couple scenarios. Is that of how using these various options and tools, other scenarios?
Well, because I think that this, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this creates certainly a moral commitment, if not a financial commitment, to then go execute these pieces of infrastructure. So it puts us on the hook for a very large bill, whether it does legally or not. And so it would be good to know how we're going to go fund that. Councilmatic bonds can only go so far.
I don't know. Was that on the list?
Sure, it
Doesn't
was
matter.
150 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, my reaction, as this was unfolding, and I agree that you did a good job of presenting a complex topic in a way that I could understand and keep up. Now, I could not repeat more than 1% of it, but it'll be more familiar. It'll be something when I get a copy of your presentation, if that's possible. That would be very, very helpful. But what's really clear is now a connection between the planning that we've done. You call it a trip bank, but what they are planned and not vested trips.
Correct.
And so we have, as we must, under GMA, plan for, and we have, the plans that we've adopted are for, well, best embodied in the Central Issaquah plan, and it's reflected in our comprehensive plans. And so really there's more framework for how to address the transportation impacts of that plan and what projects and costs and impacts than we've ever had before. It's a much more complete picture than we've ever had before. But I agree with Tola. If you'd have just showed one slide, so show me how much we'd be on the hook for. So that's very, very, very important. And I think too, I not knowing ever what the number was going to be, I'm just going to say that when I first conceived of the goal of creating a master transportation plan, to me it was trying to fill in those parts as well. There's a little bit about priority and sequence, because what I I think what this proposal does is that rather than the direct impact, that intersection, it's like, here's our master plan, here's your impact to that. And so now, independent of these growths happening, we can plan and execute on a plan for financing and addressing our transportation issues.
I think one of the reasons why the city share is large, and nobody gets thrown under the bus for it, but we can think about some of the reasons. We noticed that we had 15,000 out of 29,000 trips that are vested. Those people were vested under a code where we had concurrency and we had an impact fee. But the concurrency was the fix the nearest intersection, and the impact fee wasn't connected to concurrency, so they were paying $1,000 or $1,500 instead of $8,000. So none of us get blamed for that. It's how we set it all up. Now we see how that doesn't work, and we have a way to get out of that. But while I had a slide that said city shares 167,000, and that's accurate, the piece that's city share that we haven't got revenue that we can count on is a mere 119 million. It's still a huge number, and I take all of your comments to mean you want to talk some more about that. We didn't want to try and solve that this early in the game because we didn't even know if you had an appetite for 6 intersections or 2 intersections or 20 intersections lower than the level of service. If you had an appetite for an impact fee of $8,000 for a single family house. If those things are just, you guys guessed wrong, then we don't need to drag you through the how do we pay for it. If on your review of the rest of the program, it's starting to look pretty serious. We could do this if we can get to the 119 million, then we can start talking about the 119 million. It's not to say we're not going to get there, but it doesn't seem to me it's not where you start. At least it isn't where I start. If you would rather start there, I suppose we could go there. But I also think that of all the things we're trying to do, it's the only one that we don't have to do before we start the rest of it. We don't have to have this money in the bank. There's not a statute in the books under growth management or impact fees. There's lots of statutes about you need to think about financing, you need to look for resources. None of them say you have to have a balanced budget. They allow us to get the rest of it in place, and then in the weeks and months and years after that, work with our constituents to say, would you do this one? Would you do that one? Give you a chance to take one out to the voters and try it, and if they go like this, we're halfway home, and if they go like this, we're back at the drawing board.
All right, thank you.
I've got more hands going up.
2 quick comments. It's been since Saturday since I read all this, but wasn't there a change in the proposed ordinance from 6 years to 10 years to be able to spend the money? Is there a change in state law?
Correct. That's a law change.
That's fairly significant.
Yes.
And number 2, for every project that we allow to go through now, the share that we're going to have to pay is just going to get larger, right? I mean, because we have such smaller impact. We have small, if we don't adopt something, for every project that goes through with a smaller impact fee, the share that we have to pay for our projects just gets larger.
That's exactly right. And so I have not been part of anything that you've been doing lately, getting to your development agreement with Costco. So I don't have an iron in that fire. But I've been minding my store here, and it kind of tickled me to find out that the numbers that you're getting in the 20+ million from them actually it's about the numbers that we've come up with here. They're not getting a free ride, and we're not getting a free ride. But it's, like you say, it's not the development that's paying the old low rates.
Okay, so before we wrap up, I do want to see if there's anybody in the audience who would like to make comments. Anybody in the audience would like to make comments? Anyone in the audience?
I'm Connie Marsh. I have a store in Issaquah, live in Issaquah. Go to way too many meetings, way too late at night in Issaquah sometimes. So I went to the PPC meeting, and I, of course, am a citizen business person, and it's sort of like reality intrudes. If you exempt 6 intersections, traffic is going to get worse. How bad exactly does it have to get at some of these intersections to stop concurrency from, allowing concurrency. I have no idea. I have no picture of that. So that is something that I would like to understand is terrible, 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 maybe like Newport Way, 3 nights out of a week trying to get home at 4:30 where you're backed up basically to 12th all the way down Issaquah Hobart Road. I don't know, because that's intolerable. So then I look at the way traffic is now, and I look at the model run that is supposed to be describing how traffic is now, and it's not. So I again question the model run and the recent traffic counts, because as has been in the news, traffic suddenly, to surprise everyone, has gotten really bad really fast. So I'm not comfortable in this model run being correct. Remember, we had the model run for the EIS for the Central Issaquah plan only 2 years ago that was showing that we were doing great. And then we had the new model run that showed that we were doing really bad for the future. And now we've changed it all around a little again, and now we're doing really great if we just close our eyes, which is what the general public is going to say, and pretend that those intersections don't exist. And we all know it's all part of a system, and when an intersection gets jammed up, it jams up way beyond its intersection. So the people who have not really been brought to the table in this conversation is the general public, who I expect is going to laugh hysterically when they see 6 exempt intersections and where they are and how it feels like, well, we just aren't going to count those cars. Because even though we're sitting there in traffic with those cars, they don't really exist in how we're planning. And so I hear that conversation all the time. The other people that I'm curious that weren't included is WashDOT. I don't know how they feel about decreasing levels of service with our development on their main corridors. I don't know how the city of Sammamish feels about us just basically saying, yeah, no, we aren't going to do anything. I don't know how King County feels about that same assumption. And I would actually like to hear some of that input, because I think we are going to have the conversations with those people, because we aren't long-term just going to be able to close our eyes and say, no, it doesn't exist. We're going to have to figure out how to solve some of the problems. And unless we talk to our adjacent people and our community and the business owners and work together to solve some of these problems, we're really doing things just sort of piecemeal. So I'm going to skip parks for a second because I'm talking about cars. So I'm going to go down on my notes. Oh, Planning Policy Commission voted. 5 people said yes, we'll pass on through. 4 people were very concerned with the funding potential and how we are going to fund these projects, and the fact that we're sort of a little bit pregnant. We have adopted the Central Issaquah plan. We are giving people the assumption that this is the development that is going to happen, yet we don't have a cogent plan in place for how we're going to pay for the infrastructure. And yeah, we all know that you're going to actually have to pay later, but you do have to have a plan of how to make your town great to begin with. And I think you're actually behind the curve, no matter how many times these guys say that's later. It was 2 years ago in my mind, because you do actually have to build the projects. And if we don't build the projects because we don't have the money, then we have to give the money back after 10 years, right? Isn't that what it says? And so I think it's of the essence, because we've been collecting impact fees for a very long time and we've actually built very little. So I don't see how this is any different. And now I'm going to start to segue between parks and roads and multimodal, because our parks has trails and urban trails in it, yet our multimodal talks about sidewalks, and our land use and concurrency all talk about people getting out of their cars and walking. I don't understand which impacts go to which things in reality. If we are going to fix a sidewalk because it's an urban trail and that's the Parks Department, yet we collected an impact fee for multimodal. I don't know. That's like this in my brain. And I don't know that anybody knows that yet, but I think it's something we have to figure out. So for parks in the EIS, they said $75 million basically was going to be our investment for parks in order to offset the impacts of the Central Issaquah Plan. Now I see that we're at 46 plus, and I don't really understand how this is adhering to our SEPA responsibilities if we aren't at least getting up to that 75 million that was in the EIS. And so does that mean we're going to have to redo our SEPA for parks also because this was part of our offset? It is also interesting as I'm reading the comprehensive plan element updates for parks. I don't want to get overly complicated, and it's really hard for me not to just dive down the rabbit hole and try to take you with me. So we just basically pay one fee per capita for parks impact fees. And then somehow that magically gets distributed into a awesome park system for the Central Issaquah Plan in all of town. Yet, in reality, we have private parks that the public uses. We have trails that go through private and public property that are elements of our parks and trails system. We have regional trails going straight through our town that don't get even shown on our map as part of our parks system. And when we try to understand how we should be funding our park system, we use this incredibly simplistic fee structure, and then we never really funnel it down to how do we have a great parks system and how are we going to use those dollars in the places where we have a low level of service, because our level of service is a fee. So we don't know if a sector of our town has no parks. We don't know any of those things. So how are we allocating our impact fees? So I see I went down the rabbit hole. I took you with me. So what I am saying is I don't know that this is the proper amount of money. I don't think that has been analyzed appropriately. We just assumed the same status as before. And I think it is time to try to understand, because I didn't see a list of the projects for parks tonight. I don't know if it is somewhere. It's going to come out in your future, in the reports. So, because my goal is an awesome city with awesome interconnected parks that all link together, that combine with our concurrency system. And I don't understand how all of these dollars and all of these plans are getting us that all together appropriately. And I realize that's this big, huge thing, and what is the answer to the question? I think we need to relook at our level of service standards for parks and try to make them finer grained so that we can get the parks that we need, where we need them, when we need them, and that we can understand why it's going that direction. And the CIP should be built from that, and the level of service fees should be built from that. It shouldn't just be a one-stop shopping sort of a list. Okay, that's enough rabbit hole for me. I can do no more. Have fun.
Thank you. Any other comments or information that staff has for us? You guys done?
I guess we could say next steps. You've heard it from Randy tonight. The studies are coming out soon. Stay tuned. They'll be posting them. We'll send emails, updates, the upcoming meetings.
Okay.
Aware of them.
We took careful notes this evening, and we'll do our best to be responsive.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this meeting is adjourned.